Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's event, Day 2 of the AfricaCom Symposium 2020, sponsored by Wiseasy. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. On the left-hand side of your screen is a Q&A. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can type your question into the Q&A box and submit your questions to our speakers. All questions will be saved, so if we don't get to answer you, we may follow up via email. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the yellow Help widget. Here you can find answers to common questions. A copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the green Resource List widget. Towards the end of today's presentation, we'll ask you for your feedback. A survey will pop open on your screen and will only take 1 minute to complete. Your feedback is extremely helpful. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available about 1 day after the event and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier today. I would now like to turn the event over to our moderator, Connecting Africa's editor, Paula Gilbert.
Hello and welcome to the AfricaCom 2020 Digital Symposium. Thanks so much for joining us for this 2-day event. As Becky said, my name is Paula Gilbert and I'm the editor of Connecting Africa, and I will be your host today. This is the start of day 2 of our mini event series. We had a great first day on Tuesday looking at the African Telecoms Outlook for 2020, and today we have 2 more great topics for you. First, we'll be looking at FinTech in Africa with a topic entitled Mobile Money 2.0, the bright future of mobile financial services innovation. That will run for about an hour and a quarter, and then we'll take a short break and come back with our second topic, which is Connecting the Next Billion, Strategies for Getting Africa on Grid. So please stick around for that. But first, let's kick off with the first topic of the day. Now, we all know Africa was the birthplace of mobile money, with M-Pesa the first to launch, but now almost every operator has its own version of mobile money. While it continues to rise in popularity, the industry is quickly evolving and launching more mobile-based financial services every day. You can see this is something I cover quite a lot, and these are all recent headlines from Connecting Africa. Over the past few years, we have seen so much evolution in this space. We're really moving beyond just payments, and the industry is evolving into a more holistic financial services space, with telecoms operators offering things like insurance, phone financing, loans for SMEs, and even microloans for individuals. There's also been a blurring of lines between banks and telcos, and the banks have really begun embracing digital services and have even launched their own mobile offerings or MVNOs in some cases. So we've really got a lot to speak about today with our industry insiders, and just to get their take on what Mobile Money 2.0 will really look like for Africa. So on the agenda today, first up, we're going to hear from Wiseasy CTO Riad LAQLACH, who is joining us from Morocco. Welcome, Riad. Maybe you can give us a bit of an overview of what Wiseasy does and what your focus is in Africa.
Of course. Thank you, Paula, for the introduction. I'm honored to be here with you in this wonderful event, AfricaCom 2020. So to give you an idea about what we do as Wiseasy company, so we are a fintech company focusing on technology trends in digital payment fields. So we have a fantastic team providing the leading hardware and also cloud-based solutions to enable and democratize digital payment for the merchant side and also for the end user in a secure way. So our headquarters is in Beijing, but just to give you an idea about how our concern for Africa is, so we did open an office in Morocco. So we have a dedicated team also in Morocco just to serve our customers in Africa and to be close to their time zone.
Okay, wonderful. We look forward to your presentation in a little bit. Our second keynote today is going to come from Wane Ngambi. He is the Chief Digital Banking Officer of the Zambia National Commercial Bank, ZANACO. He's going to join us on the line in a little while. Then after that, we will head straight into the panel discussion with Riad and Wane, and that'll take about 30 minutes, and then we'll have some time for the audience Q&A after that. So please, if you have any questions for our speakers during the day, you can put them into the little Q&A console that you can see in front of you. Okay, but for now, let's head straight into our first speaker, which is Wiseasy CTO Riad LAQLACH. So Riad, over to you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone for being here as an audience for this AfricaCom 2020. So my keynote will be about mobile money, a bright future in a pandemic era. So for the agenda, so we will speak about the COVID-19 digital payment accelerator, the change drivers in the payment market, the rise of digital payment service providers, and how mobile money is a game changer, and what Wiseasy do for that. So Wiseasy in the picture, and of course a conclusion with post-COVID-19, what is the new normal. So if we start, so COVID-19 digital payment accelerator. So we know all that COVID-19 now remains a global threat. Its human impact becomes even more significant. The highly contagious nature of the virus has spurred public concern that the disease may be transmitted through banknotes. So we see here in a picture that many countries started to disinfect the banknotes because the public or the end customer is afraid about touching a banknote that's being touched by other people. Okay. So with this idea in mind, consumers seem increasingly ready to embrace digital wallet and contactless payment, not just out of convenience, but also because of safety. So if we look at this study done by MasterCard Global Consumer in end of April 2020. So for example, for contactless payment, we see that 46 of global consumers are switching now from bank cards without contactless features to bank cards with contactless features. And also 74% of the consumers said that they will continue using the contactless features after the COVID or post-COVID-19. So if we look in the next slide, so what we are facing as a software provider, for example, is that before the COVID-19, when, for example, personally, when I was asked by a customer, what is the safety features of your solution, for example, what we did answer is how we encrypt the sensitive data inside the databases, for example, how we secure the communication channel, how we are PCI compliant. So those were the answers for safety before COVID. But after COVID, now, in addition to those security features and security aspects for the systems, we are now replying to the customers about their needs of how the safety or becomes now with social distancing and no physical touch experience. So we can see that the safety meaning has changed before and after the COVID-19. So if we look at this estimation done by Bain Analysis, so they estimate that the percentage of transaction values done digitally in 2025 will be more up to 5 to 10% of what we have now before the COVID-19. So it will be 67% of the value of the digital payments. And this is done due to what? To the consumer and the merchant behaviors. So for example, in physical stores, the consumer has shifted its behavior to the digital payment. And for the merchant in the physical store, the merchant has now a big acceptance for digital payment than cash, of course. And of course, in e-commerce also, we will have a rise of 1 to 2 points. And this is because of the increase of new e-commerce users. And also the old users or the existing users will spend more money because they are trying to change the behavior ordering goods, for example, while they are at home because they are afraid of going out. Also, for the merchant side, the retailers will adopt online and omni-channel approach. So now we can see how COVID-19 helped the digital payment to be more adopted by the consumers and the merchants. So if we go to the change drivers in the payment market, so in our payment market now, the change drivers are 5. This is what we conclude now. And the first one is the changed customer behavior. So now the customer needs fast, secure, and smooth payment experience. Also, the customer needs a cost-effective by reducing transaction fees. If we go to the changed competitive environment, so we can witness recently that a very big competition is here due to the new participants entering the payment market. So we have a lot of participants and companies that are entering this market of digital payment. So the third change driver is the new regulatory initiatives. So we are witness now of new guidelines from regulators in all countries that are here to promote innovation and competition. So the fourth one is the new technologies, and we can see that there is a lot of new technologies here now to reduce the cost and also increase the efficiency of digital payment. And the last one is the changed market infrastructure. So we can see recently that the acquirers, for example, they are replacing or doing a revision of their outdated payment infrastructure in the market to be able to accept all those digital payment solutions. So for the rise of digital payment service providers, we can see why the cashless is always in a war against cash. So the first thing is cashless will give us a lot of advantages. For example, the first one is no need to carry cash, save from thieves, recording of all transactions, big economy for financial institutions, so no need to print and monitor all those banknotes and all that. Easier monitoring for government also, and solves the problem of change. So this is why all those new providers or service providers are coming to this digital payment services. So if we look to this study done by Dutch Bank, so we can see that in the weekly in-store purchases by country between 2019 and 2025, we can see that the mobile, which is here in the light green, the mobile is growing very, very fast in all countries and in all markets, and also cars also with this light blue. So we are going to cashless society. So the cash will be disappearing step by step. So and especially the mobile is growing very fast. Here we have another study done by Business Insider that is showing the growth of digital banking in the number of users and number of accounts opened in all the global site. So also we have a forecast from Deloitte which said that almost 50% of the world's population will be using digital banking services by the end of 2021. Also, US citizens using digital banking services will reach the 2/3 of their population in end of 2020, according to the American Banking Association. And also McKinsey predicts the number of digital banking users in Asia will top 1.2 billion before the end of 2020. So that's why we have a lot of companies, and we have now what we call the neobanks, which are banks that are operating just online. They don't have any physical branches, and they are now taking a very big market share. And also, the big news is that the giants of technology, which are, for example, Google, Amazon, Apple, and all of them, they are interested now in the payment services for digital payment. And just in USA, they are taking 50% of the market. So 50% of 1 trillion point 35. And also we can see that the banks now, they are increasing their IT budgets because they are afraid about all what is coming from those new providers of digital payment. So and also the mobile banking is expected to grow of 2.83% between 2019 and 2024. Now we come to the mobile money. So mobile money, why mobile money is a game changer. So mobile money, as you know all, so it's a technology of an experience of over 10 years now. And it's widely spread in Africa because of the environment of our lovely continent. So why it's a game changer? Because of the 4 billion people who don't have internet access, only 800 millions are in unserviced areas. What does it mean? It means that the remaining 3 billion 0.2 people are in fact covered by a telecommunication network. And that's why we see that all the telecom operators are doing mobile money now, because they have covered almost all the unbanked people, and they are the only ones to bring this technology to those people. And also we see that the regulators are also giving them more push to give those services to those unbanked people. So digital inclusion through mobile money is becoming the last frontier to achieving financial inclusion. However, as technology continues to improve, the gap widens for those who are left behind. So that's why we are trying to push on mobile money, and that's why mobile money also moves from mobile money, what we call mobile money 1.0, which is a mobile money solutions that are using just USSD gateways. So just a traditional phone, not a smartphone, for example, to do all the transaction services. And now with the rise of the smartphones also in Africa, so mobile money is going to mobile money 2.0, offering, of course, connectivity through APIs and QR code payment and all that. So here we will see Wiseasy in the picture. So Wiseasy is a smart payment device leader. So we produce smart Android devices to enable all those digital payments, and also to serve telecom operators to accept mobile money inside the merchant side. So there are some merchants that accept just using a mobile phone, but if it's a manner of security and how we secure the transactions and all that, we can use our devices that are PCI compliant and PCI PTS. So in the same time, we are cloud solution providers. So let's speak a little bit about Wisemesh solution, which is a Wiseasy solution that is helping the telecom operators to do the customer onboarding. We all know that to be able to use a mobile money, you need to register and subscribe to a mobile money service, and the telecom operator needs to register this user, if it's merchant or end user, and gives all the KYC done to this user to the regulatory. So Wisemesh is a KYC solution giving a customer onboarding facilities to the telecom operators with a real-time ID and SIM data scanning. So we have an OCR that can scan the ID and passports and any document from the customer or the merchant, and will take all the information directly from the picture, and also scan the data of the SIM cards, of course. It's a secure process and data storage, so everything is based on security in AES, RSA encryption keys for security of channel communication, and it will create a proof of ID. So you will have a proof of ID, and you will have an electronic ID for this customer or this merchant. So if we look at the WiseMatch process overview, so we can see that, for example, we can choose the SIM card package or the subscription model of this mobile money. We can do the ID document scanning, so by our devices with the embedded OCR library from Wiseasy. We have the SIM barcode scanning to match this SIM card with this ID document of the user. And of course, we have digital copy of all the documents that we need for subscribing customer. And at the end, we have the ability to capture the fingerprint and signature of the end customer or the merchant. And all that will be filled inside the form, the subscription form, and will be sent directly to the telecom operator to as a digital contract to be saved also in their archiving, and also to enable and activate the mobile money accounts in real time. So in the other hand, we have the Wise Wallet, which is something that is used also by Mobile Money 2.0, which is a wallet in a smartphone, Android and iOS, where you can connect your mobile money and have all the services in your hand, in your smartphone. You can find in our services how we can do loyalty, we can do earn and rewards, we can have promotions and discounts also, and of course the basic functions that are cash in, cash out, and the P2P transfer. So, of course, we can link the wallet to a bank card also, not just to the telecom operator and all that. So it's a fully solution to be working with banks and also with telecom operators for mobile money. So for a conclusion, so post-COVID-19, so the new normal, so we all see now that physical distancing measures are likely to carry over into a post-COVID world, meaning that mobile money will continue to play a crucial role and result in increased prevalence. So the future of mobile money 2.0 is a bright future, especially with post-COVID. So we are all looking to push more and more this solution and this technology, and to be the leader. Of course, Africa is a leader and will be expanding its knowledge of mobile money to all other continents also. So thank you for joining this. So it was Riad LAQLACH, Chief Technology Officer from Wiseasy.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Riad. It was such a great overview and really interesting to hear what Wiseasy is doing in this space. If you have any questions for Riad, you can put them into the Q&A console now. We're going to soon head into our second keynote for the day. I just want to check that Wane is on the line with me.
Yes, I am, Paula. Finally, I got on.
Great, Wane. Welcome. Okay, welcome. Obviously, we can't talk about mobile money without hearing from a local bank. And so that's why we've got this next presentation. And that's from Wane Ngambi, who is the Chief Digital Banking Officer for the Zambia National Commercial Bank. So Wane, I'm going to hand over to you. Take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to join the forum. It's actually quite exciting to be able to talk about the story of mobile money to a broader forum. So just quickly taking you through, I will be pretty much speaking on behalf of Zanaco Bank, where I'm the Chief Digital Banking Officer, but I do have a rather colorful background. I spent a couple of years myself working with mobile money in different markets, specifically Zambia and across the continent in Africa for both MTN and Tigo. So very good insights from a GSM MNO perspective. Now come banker. So very quickly, I will just take you through my presentation today. Paula, maybe you can just guide me whether the presentations are visible at the moment. I'm not really sure from my end, but just quickly taking us through on our first slide, which shows the growth of mobile money. I've basically gotten some statistics of the GSMA 2019 report, which shows us the growth of mobile money over the years. So what you will see is that 2019 versus 2018, we had 680 million mobile money customers, and the growth has been approximately 20%. When we look at the 2019 statistics, we've had over 1 billion customers registered on mobile money. Now, very interesting statistics that are being presented at the moment. This is obviously an extract from the GSMA report from 2019. If you look at the growth in terms of the amount of money that are processed per day in mobile money alone across the globe, we're now looking at $1.9 billion being processed through the mobile money systems across the network. This is an astronomical growth. Going back to 2018, we had approximately $1.3 billion processed on a daily basis through the mobile money platforms across the world. Now, it's really interesting to see that the trend is very positive in terms of what's happening across the mobile money space. If you look at the number of mobile money deployments, there's about 290 deployments across the world, which has also shown a significant growth. This basically tells us there's huge opportunities in addressing financial inclusion from a mobile money perspective. So what we are beginning to see a lot more, and I'll speak to it a little further in my next slide, is that more operators are seeing the opportunity of monetizing mobile money and driving financial inclusion in terms of growth and scale. Moving on to my next slide, I'm basically showing what are some of the statistics, more specifically in Africa. When you look at the trends, when you look at 2018 versus 2019, in terms of the growth trends for mobile money, you will see that that there is a significant number of growth. There's a significant number of growth that's happening across the continent, and specifically looking at sub-Saharan Africa. 2018 had we had about 272 operations live with mobile money. Skipping forward to 2019, it's been an increase of 18 operations that have come live between 2018 and 2019. The interesting thing to note is that of the 18 new operations, 12 of them have come from sub-Saharan Africa. That's basically showing us that the trend in Africa is relatively strong when it comes to new deployments. The amount of opportunity on the African continent continues to show great opportunities for innovators and fintechs and mobile money players to constantly evolve and add new products and services through mobile money channels. Just going very quickly, I'll just show you some of the most specific statistics around how each of the operators is doing in terms of driving the actual financial inclusion through mobile money. So as I've highlighted on the next slide, you will see there is actually quite a number of a breakdown of operations across Africa. A good majority of the operations that have come live are currently struggling to drive usage. So you will see there's 1 billion users of mobile money at the moment, but of the 1 billion, we're only seeing 372 million that are active users across the continent. Again, speaking to the opportunity around mobile money. And if you are to dissect what is actually the challenge around it, I will present this a little bit in detail as I go into the subsequent slides. So what you will see is, in terms of acquisition of customers coming on board, we've got a very strong surge with 1 billion people using. The challenge that is there and that's presented to a number of operators is how do we drive more usage out of the 1 billion registered customers? The number continues to grow year on year, but I think one of the big challenges that is there is we still have some psychological context that we've got to shift. Because remember, most of the customers that are being introduced to mobile money today have never experienced financial inclusion. So they don't really get the concept of digital money versus actual money. The whole concept around cash still being king. My next slide basically shows you what the dynamic looks like. These are statistics, again, from the GSMA report of 2018, where it shows you that cash out is still a key driver. Cash out being, cash in and cash out are the key drivers for mobile money. Looking back on my experience across the Tigo and the MTN environments, it's very clear that between 80 and 90% of transactions are actually driven through cash in, cash out in the mobile money space. But obviously, there's a big drive to get secondary services to also start to pick up. So you hear a lot about version 1 of mobile money. When you start to hear the discussion of version 2 of mobile money, we're now actually beginning to move away from the basic services of P2P and cash in, cash out, and moving more into more advanced services such as micro lending, payments, and the likes. If you look at the table, the table presented before you, this is 2018 statistics in terms of how mobile money is doing. So we're looking at 73% of all inbound traffic being cash in terms of mobile money usage, whilst 67% in terms of outbound traffic is cash out, with smaller segments being used for things such as bill payments, bank push and pull. So it's already very clear that there's got to be a concerted effort to moving services away from your deliberate cash in, cash out, and moving more into more advanced services, which speaks to some of the psychological barriers that I'll be speaking to around understanding the consumer behavior for you to be able to unlock the full potential of mobile money, which is mobile money version 2. On the next slide, basically, I'll touch on a bit about what is the challenges or what are the barriers around mobile money. So there is a psychological context around mobile money. A vast majority of the African continent, especially, has had challenge around driving financial inclusion. So when you look at the traditional banking sector has been skewed to the higher segment in terms of consumer service. The issue is obviously profitabilities are higher once you start to address products from a higher echelon in terms of customer demographics. The challenge that is there is obviously it's left a big gap around the mass segment of consumers, which predominantly is the majority of Africa. If I look at Africa's statistics or dynamics, 70 to 80% is on the lower segment, earning segments. So the challenge now is how do we create a cost-effective solution and drive the right behavior for consumers to be able to jump onto the mobile money space. So on what you tend to see is that there is an evolution that's been defined in terms of how mobile money moves up the ladder. So you have your stage 1, which is predominantly what we are seeing in a number of countries across Africa. Zambia is no exception. What you see is most customers start out in the customer journey of depositing and withdrawing their money into a store of value. And then also P2P become the initial services that are used by consumers. And remember, these are consumers who traditionally were not serviced. So they've always dealt with cash in terms of their means of trade and their means of exchanging currency. Now, you've obviously onboarded them onto this new product, which is mobile money. It's got a lot of additional potential. The challenge is that there is a disconnect between the understanding of the full potential of money. Most consumers generally don't fully appreciate that digital money is actually as good as cash. The journey of actually converting the consumer from digital currency into cash is an actual big journey that a lot of mobile money operators are struggling with, to actually get the consumer to get into the ecosystem and understand that cash is actually the same as mobile money or digital currency. Looking at some Zambian statistics, which is the slide before you now, you will actually see that when you look at financial inclusion, for instance, in Zambia, as an example, and it's very similar across Africa, you'll find that the financial inclusion rate in Zambia is about 59%, as according to the Bank of Zambia, which is the local regulator, the financial services regulator, it's 59%. Now, what happens is when you split that out in terms of the actual form of financial inclusion, you find that the number actually drops slightly to somewhere around 30 to 40%. Now, the dynamics is that in financial services, there's two elements of financial. There's the formal financial service regulated by the regulator, and then there's the informal financial service, which is all the what we call the chilimbas, which is the local domestic savings groups. No systems involved. Now, obviously, communities are building solutions for themselves. Now, what the mobile money operators are working on is to try and eat into that particular segment of consumers. It's about 20% of the actual reported financial inclusion rate. 20% of that is actually informal. So a number of incentives are going in to actually convert consumers from the informal financial inclusion into a formal financial inclusion. And this speaks to adding more advanced services on your mobile money platform and getting the consumer to get comfortable to move across. One of the important things to note is because mobile operators are driving penetration in terms of voice data and traditional GSM services, what we tend to see is they're unlocking potential to going into rural markets and locations that were traditionally unserviced before. So with the use of the GSM technology and the mobile money product bundled together, we start to bring consumers onto the platforms and then drive them up the usage behavior, taking them to mobile money 2.0, mobile money 3.0. Now, an interesting dynamic about mobile money 3.0 is where the banks are pretty much playing. You have your wealth management products that are very advanced in terms of product portfolio from a financial service. But what you will tend to find is that in mobile money, majority of the consumers are on the lower side, which is your version 1, stage 1 of financial inclusion. But very quickly, consumers have gotten comfortable with stage 1 and are moving into more advanced products and services. Already, it's quite a big success. Mobile money has a number of lending and saving solutions, which is the second version of mobile money. But then you start progressing into wealth management, predictive products, and things like that as we begin to progress over the ladder. So it's really exciting, the fact that consumers are slowly coming on, but they're also beginning to climb the ladder. And I'll show you in a second some of the other statistics from Zambia as well around the consumer behavior in terms of the evolution of the consumer from the entry level 1 version of mobile money going up to the higher end. So just very quickly, I'll take you to the next slide, which shows you the effect of mobile money on GDP. And I took a snapshot of the Zambian GDP and the performance. So we've been looking from a banking sector, we've been looking at the projections of how obviously the drivers of GDP have actually been driving growth across the country. So if you look at, for instance, Zambia, the projected GDP growth for 2019 is about 2.4%. It slowed down significantly, obviously, for various reasons. Obviously, COVID is one of the impacts that we're expecting to further drive down the GDP performance in Zambia, particularly. But what is very interesting for myself is that at the bottom, when you look at some of Zambia's key drivers, so there's a wide array of drivers. Zambia is predominantly a mining country. So majority of GDP is driven by mining and agriculture. Now, traditionally, when these industries were doing really well, we tend to find that GDP growth is relatively high. Now, there are also other secondary drivers of the GDP, which is ICT and trade. And when you unbundle ICT and trade, what's coming very clear, especially in Zambia, is that because financial inclusion is beginning to be driven by the mobile network operators, which fall into the ICT sub-segment of the GDP growth, what we tend to see is that ICT at the moment is consistently growing, and it's outpacing even the traditional growth, the traditional growth drivers, which will be mining and agriculture, which are currently going into a recessional type of pattern, whilst what we are seeing in Zambia is that ICT and trade, which are key components for mobile money, are beginning to drive GDP growth. So when you look at the 2.4% growth in Zambia of GDP, a lot of it is actually being driven by the mobile money growth that we're beginning to see and enjoy the last 2 to 3 years within Zambia, around some of the successes. And very quickly, I'll take you to the next slide just to show you in terms of some of the scores that we have seen, explaining the growth that you're seeing from a GDP perspective. You're seeing ICT beginning to drive growth. So what you'll see is that in terms of our customer growth, in terms of our adoption of mobile money, specifically in Zambia, where the last 3 years have shown some really good performance in terms of growth. You'll see that I've got statistics for 2016, 2017, and 2018. The number of customers going onto mobile money has significantly grown. The interesting thing to note is on your right, you have the pie charts that show you the evolution between 2017 and 2018, the split between the banking sector and the mobile money sector. If you look at the share of consumer financial inclusion that's been driven in Zambia, 10% is 19 banks. 19 banks the last 50 years have driven 10% of financial inclusion. When you look at the evolution of mobile money currently is accounting for about 89% of financial inclusion in a Zambian environment. And mobile money is relatively young. We're looking at the last 8 to 10 years. And the real growth actually has happened in the last 3 years, which is the graph on your left. You can actually see that there's been a steady growth in the number of active accounts within Zambia, growing up to somewhere around 16 million. Now, sorry, that's registered accounts, but the active accounts have equally been showing a positive trend in terms of growth. If you look at the statistics for 2018, you find that we're sitting at 4.3 million financially included customers. Now, this speaks to the 59% financial inclusion number when you look at the statistic I showed earlier. But it's very clear, at least from a Zambian perspective, mobile money is the key driver for financial inclusion. And you can also see that from a GDP perspective, there's very strong movement in terms of GDP growth, relatively strong, especially that the traditional trade drivers, which are agriculture and mining, are slowing down. But what we tend to see now is mobile money is beginning to bolster the growth in terms of GDP from a Zambian perspective. And it's very clear that mobile money from that perspective is actually quite a key driver if you look at the slide. Going into the next slide, just to understand what are consumers doing when you look at mobile money in particular. So you tend to see that, I touched on it earlier, and it's a global statistic. Cash in, cash out is the entry level when you're driving financial inclusion. Consumers land into cash in, cash out. You will see on the left that if you split the total transactions across the country, you'll see that cash in, cash out is driving the majority of the volumes and the values. So what it's telling us is, as you drive financial inclusion, you're converting the consumer from being a cash-based consumer into a mobile money consumer. But even when they enter the mobile money space, they don't go straight into the exciting stuff. They actually start out with just driving cash in, cash out, and start to evolve upwards across the channel to more advanced services such as micro lending and the likes. The future of mobile money is very exciting in terms of what the opportunities are, because what you find in a traditional banking environment is wealth management, insurance, and more advanced products. But then what we tend to see is in the mobile money environment, these are slowly being added to the suite of products that are currently there. But you will see on your left that those transactions are pretty much on the lower side. So it's telling us that consumers yet haven't started shifting in terms of behavior. But in the next couple of years, we anticipate that you'll see less of cash in, cash out, and more shifting to your right, which is a healthier environment where consumers who are traditionally excluded from financial inclusion start moving into more exciting products and services as well. Now, very quickly moving on to just some of the dynamics around cash in, cash out. I think one of the things that's really exciting now, as much as, yes, it's the entry level for mobile money, I think it's really exciting to think through that consumers are slowly starting to accept mobile money, but it's more in the cash in, cash out perspective where consumers are beginning to accept this more in terms of agency. So what you find is that agency has significantly grown. If you look at the statistics in the number of agents across Zambia in particular. Now, and this trend is across Africa. You will see that in 2018 and in 2019, we've seen a significant surge in terms of the number of active agents across the country within Zambia. 2017, we had active agents of 22,000. 2018, they're looking at statistics of about 46,000. I'm very confident that once the 2019 stats are out in Zambia, it's a very, very positive trend. And here lies in where the actual success story comes from mobile money. Cash in, cash out, and agency rollout is the critical driver when you're looking at the growth in terms of mobile money. What we tend to see now is, as a banker myself, ex-telco becoming a banker, one of the key things that we very quickly moved on to in the next slide is we've already identified that our means of, as a banker now, speaking as a banker, our means to service consumers is not as effective as mobile money. So we're learning very quickly as a banking sector. So rather than only focusing on ATMs and branches to roll out, banks are also beginning to invest in the agency business, because we understand that consumers at the entry level want to start with the basic service, which is in agency, which is cash in and cash out. Now, there's a very unhealthy balance in terms of the dynamics between banks and mobile money operators. If you look at Zambia in particular, 97% of the agent network belongs to mobile network operators, which explains why mobile money has an unhealthy share of financial inclusion in terms of customers on their platform. Now, banks are very quickly also shifting to a similar model. Zanaco is no exception. We've also rolled out an agency banking model. By far the widest agency banking model. You will see on your right-hand side, one of the things that we have been driving the last couple of years is to drive an agency model, which allows us to go the last mile to the consumer, which is a very similar model to what mobile money is doing. So the entire financial industry is learning very quickly from the mobile money environment and trying to harness the collaborations or the partnerships using APIs and using advanced distribution models to be able to copy and mimic some of the successes that are being shown on the mobile money side of things. The next slide just shows you some of the statistics from a bank. Now, remember, banks traditionally rolled out branches and ATMs in terms of servicing customers and had an agenda of driving financial inclusion. Now, the interesting statistic is that the numbers have been relatively flat from an ATM perspective and from a branch perspective. Now, the graph here, what it shows you is Zanaco launched an agency model. The line in yellow shows you the growth or the trajectory of the transactions that are coming through the agency model. The gray line shows you what the branches are doing, and the red line shows you what the ATMs are doing. By far, the ATM has been the success story in the banking sector. But by copying some of the models that are used, distribution models that are used in the MNO and the mobile money space, it's very clear that the agency model by far will outshine all the channels. If I look at my statistics in Zanaco today, about 60% of all my transactions are driven through the agency channel. Now, that's a very, very big shift the last couple of years. But mind you, we have not yet grown as high in terms of customer numbers as the MNOs. So what this does for the banking sector and for Zanaco in particular, it allows me to drive much more aggressive growth across the region or across the Zambian landscape, enabling me to be able to service more customers in a more cost-effective manner going forward. Now, just looking at the evolution of mobile money, banks, and the financial sector as a whole, there is a very clear roadmap in terms of where we're going. It always starts out with the entry-level stuff, but then evolves upwards to more advanced services. So this basically explains phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4 of mobile money, where you start out with your wallet and your basic store of value, deposit and withdraw, cash in, cash out. Then you start moving on to mobile payments, which is more in the phase 2, and then mobile financial services, where we start exploring things such as micro lending, insurance, wealth management, more advanced services in terms of your technology roadmap, and products that you're beginning to bundle on top of a consumer base that's now becoming excited by the whole concept of mobile money. And this is what we see as the evolution. Your phase 4 becomes the more exciting side, where you're now competing with a lot more content providers and a lot more predictive analysis in terms of where the evolution is going. Now, just to give a bit more context of what I see as, or at least we see as where the future is taking us. So as we go into more stage 3, stage 4, it's becoming clearer and clearer that big tech is also following the same. So we're following the same roadmap. So you have the likes of WeChat, the likes of Facebook, your likes of Paytm, also developing financial services. So the question is, how does mobile money compete with all of that? So you see that mobile money from an evolution perspective is changing significantly, but they are following the value chain. The banking sector is unbundling and reworking its traditional structure. But the idea is that we are trying to convert what the bank traditionally was into a new competitive model, which is very similar to the likes of the mobile money environment. But the question is, the journey is rather long, and obviously we've got competitors such as the big tech companies that are beginning to play more and more. And I think what we are seeing as the future of the phase 4 is the predictive stuff in the technologies space. Now, my last slide, I know I'm running out of time, basically just talks about the end state that I perceive is where we're going to end up. And the end state basically is pretty much a totally connected ecosystem. So the end game that everybody is anticipating is mobile money, banks, big tech are all heading towards what's called the marketplace. The marketplace is a mix of a huge number of customers, traditionally unexcluded consumers, which means it's a wider base. We know that the opportunity by customer numbers is really big. The idea is that we're bringing in a lot of consumers. Then at the same time, we're building what are called ecosystems. Every organization, mobile money, the banking sector, the big tech, are all building mini ecosystems. All these ecosystems provide opportunities for consumers to basically trade. Now, it's all going towards the digital age. Predictive science, predictive products, and predictive analytics to be able to give consumers, at the touch of a button, more convenience in terms of what their needs are. Ultimately, we also know, and this is my own prediction, Internet of Things is not very far behind. Very soon, your fridge will pretty much be making orders from your local retail store. You've got to be able to enable that, and this is where the ecosystem and the whole marketplace comes in. That's my last slide. I know it's been rather long, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to share my insights with everyone. Thank you very much.
It's very interesting to hear what you're doing in this local space. So we're going to head straight into the panel discussion now with Riad and Wane. So Riad, if you're still with us, I'm going to start with a question for you. I know it's hard to have any discussion at the moment without talking about the health crisis that we're in. So what are you seeing as being the biggest impacts that COVID-19 is having on the continent's mobile money ecosystem?
Okay, so thank you, Paula. So the COVID, as we said in the keynote, so the COVID is an accelerator now for the mobile money. So in March 2020, in the beginning of the COVID coming to Africa also, so we heard about stories that people are afraid from losing their jobs, and also especially people working in informal markets. So there is no customers for the delivery. For example, delivery boys, they cannot deliver in the beginning of the crisis. But we saw that the mobile money is the solution that helps those people to keep living and keep having money and using digital financial services, just using their traditional mobile phones. And also we can see, of course, in Kenya and Tanzania that there are some associations that's been created during this crisis, and they were able to serve, for example, some families that haven't any income during this crisis through the mobile money. So the mobile money is the saver for Africa in this crisis of COVID-19, and also it's an accelerator for the future of mobile money.
Okay, thanks. And then Wane, in your experience in the banks, do you think we are heading more towards a cashless society? We know that Africans still really love cash, but do you think that COVID-19 is pushing them more towards digital solutions?
So yes, Paula. So for me, COVID has really shown a very positive trend in terms of getting adoption going in the digital space. I know that literally every message that every healthcare institution is obviously looking at is driving about the agenda of social distancing and being able to trade without physical contact. Now, for us, that's been a fantastic opportunity. As a bank, we're basically focused on the opportunity that COVID has presented. And we're beginning to see more and more consumers shifting out of the cash environment and starting to use a lot more digital platforms. One of the exciting things that I always note, pre-COVID, banks such as Zanaco used to onboard maybe 30, 40,000 customers a month. Post-COVID, I'm actually opening up to 80 to 90,000 accounts. And this is already telling me that consumers are quickly saying, maybe let's try alternative ways of trading rather than actually using cash. And I'm seeing my deposits go up. I'm seeing transactions go up. So it's a very positive trend from where I sit.
Okay, that's good to know that there's some positives coming out of it at least. Riad, I know obviously your solutions work for both banks and telcos. So are you seeing more innovations coming from the banking side or more from the telco side or from independent players like you guys?
Okay, so for the solutions, so we can see that telecom operators are still in the mobile money sector, so they are trying to increase the features inside the mobile money to give more features to their customers, but in the same time they are facing a lot of pressure from regulators and also from banks that they are trying to take the market share also. So also we have new coming companies that are independent and working on financial inclusion also. So the idea what I see is that telecom operators are trying to partner with banks more and more now to face those coming and new entering companies that are they don't have a lot of costs, running operation costs, so they are taking a large market share. That's why telecom operators and banks that they have a lot of operating costs, they are trying to partner to give more features to the customers at the end.
Yeah, I think we have been seeing a bit more collaboration, a few deals announced just in the last week. Wane, are you also seeing in terms of banking that the banks are more interested now in partnering with mobile money platforms and not just doing it on their own?
Absolutely. So the last 3 years, and I mean, it's for me, I actually think as banks, we're actually ahead of the curve in terms of integrating into the MNO environment. What I find particularly interesting is that banks are actually even, I think, accelerating even further towards integrating into fintechs. And I think the answer is the creation of the ecosystem. So the ecosystem is a lot bigger than just the banks and the telcos. I think it's the banks, the telcos, the fintechs, big tech, pretty much everyone working together as a whole. The opportunity is absolutely there. For instance, ourselves, I see a lot of these fintechs already starting to come up with new value solutions and are looking for somewhere to switch and harness these technologies. So I'm seeing a lot more of that, both from telcos and from fintechs. In Africa, big tech, not so much, but I anticipate that the next maybe year or so, we'll see the market get very colorful.
Okay, that's good to hear. Riad, you also mentioned mobile wallets, and I know you guys have one as well. Sort of my perception is that there's a lot of mobile wallets in the market, and we're just seeing more and more. So how do you sort of differentiate yourself, and are we seeing more interoperability happening and partnerships as a way to get more people to use different kind of wallets?
Okay, so as you said, Paula, mobile wallet, we have a lot of solutions, a lot of providers of mobile wallet. So we as Wiseasy, we provide a solution, a complete solution with the mobile side, with the back end side, with front end side and all that. So a full package for any company that wants to launch a mobile wallet. So what we do is that we bring new features for this solution. So some features that are very required by the market and for example not present now in the existing solution. But the idea of interoperability is on the table. So you know that there is an African continental free trade agreement. So that happens in 2019 between the 54 African nations. So they signed this agreement for a Pan-African free trade zone. So it will be the world's largest zone, bigger than European Union. So to do trading inside all African nations. So if this will happen, and we hope that, it will connect 1.3 billion people, and it will create 3.4 trillion a single continent market. So in this agreement, if everything goes well, so we will see more interoperability between wallets. And of course, as you said, our wallet in Wiseasy is an interoperable wallet, so it has a switching and also stand-in modules that will connect all other wallets and also provide stand-in approval for other wallets. So the idea is that in Africa, we need to push for the Pan-African trade zone. We need to have an interoperable market so that we have all those wallet providers can survive and can give more features and more business to the end customer.
Okay, wonderful. We actually had a question about that from someone in the audience, so you answered it even before they asked it. So, Wane, I know that you come from, obviously, the mobile money background with the telcos as well. So what's the difference between doing digital payments from the banking perspective rather than the telco side, or are we really seeing a blurring at the moment?
So my biggest difference is the speed of execution. I think the telcos have an amazing lightning ability to quickly move on technology. And I think historically, they're leveraging their experience on distribution to drive mobile money and adoption. So obviously for years they've been pushing digital solutions. In Africa, everything is USSD or mobile based in terms of topping up your airtime and all that. So they've very well leveraged that to be able to monetize it in a financial industry. One of the advantages from the banking side, though, is in terms of maturity of product suite, the banks are actually relatively mature. The biggest challenge with the banking sector is the cost of production of any product is actually very inhibitive. When you compare that to the telcos, I think the telcos embraced the whole context of open APIs and allowing an ecosystem of partners co-creating together. So for instance, a bank doesn't need to create a lending solution on their own. Now, this is something that the telcos did very well. A couple of years ago, they partnered with nice, smart fintechs, and they come together, consumer-based product, plug the two together, phenomenal numbers coming from there. Traditionally, the banks, we created the product ourselves, we distributed it ourselves, we onboarded the customer ourselves. So now the issue is, how does the bank unbundle and learn from the same? Why? To drop the cost of production and the cost of servicing, because then it becomes a sustainable model. Without that co-creation, it becomes very difficult to build cost-effective products and solutions. So it's an interesting space in terms of the co-creation concept.
Yeah, and it's great to get your insights there. Riad, I'm going to bring you in on this one. Obviously, one touched on it in terms of the evolution. So obviously, payments is still big business, but we sort of moving beyond that. So, Riad, what do you see as the big fintech trends that we're seeing at the moment that are sort of beyond the payment space?
Okay, so if we look at the trends now, for example, in China, our headquarters is doing a lot of AI. Artificial intelligence, and also we are already doing pilots for facial recognition payment. So, but it's not yet for Africa. So it's still in other markets now, growing in other markets. It will come to Africa, I think, in the next 3 or 5 years. But for the African market, what I see is, and Wani said, is the open APIs. So how to plug, because the idea now is how we can have a fast time to market, if it's telecom operator or bank or any fintech company. So what I see is the solution that is what we call a converter of protocols. So for example, when you want to connect with another company or another financial institution, instead of developing a communication interface and wasting time, all the companies need to have the protocol converter, which is solutions that are now plug-in. It's a plug and play, so you just install it and it will connect you to all other protocols. If it's, for example, API, if it's web service, SOAP, if it's ISO 8583. So you have the ability to connect in one time all the APIs or all the services that are to be connected with other financial institutions. So this is the trend now for Africa, is to be able to connect fast and deliver all those features to the end customer.
Okay, great, thank you. And then how do you think banks are going to evolve in the next 5 years, and how ready are African banks for the digital revolution?
So right now we're very scared as the banking sector. I mean, in terms of driving financial inclusion, we've been relatively slow to market, which basically means our customer reach is not where it should be. If you compare us to markets such as China, I think the banks have been quite aggressive in terms of driving the reach and ability to provide financial service to consumers. So one of the things that I know a number of banks are beginning to do is we're beginning to pivot our strategies, because the traditional model is not going to get us the promised land. So what we're beginning to say is we need to, one, increase our reach, drop the cost of production as a bank for products and services, because traditionally core banking systems and all these things, very slow in terms of technology evolution and very costly. So that's a challenge that the banks are beginning to grapple with at the moment. Now, the reality is the world is not waiting for the banks to quickly trot along and change things. You've got big tech every day innovating. Their ability to innovate is immense. You've got small fintechs every day coming up with fantastic value-adding solutions for consumers. Then you've got the telcos who are very quickly running and assimilating all these learnings on the market. Unfortunately, the banks have not been very fast to understanding that. But very slowly, I know people are getting very concerned in all sorts of sectors, in all sorts of environments, where we're basically now beginning to say that if we don't start to adapt our business model to be able to service a different type of consumer in a much faster way, we may not be relevant in the long term. So that's definitely a concern that the banks are grappling with. But we are definitely working very quickly to try and mold ourselves, be ready or future ready, and be able to compete with tomorrow's financial service, because it won't look the way it looks today. It will look very different in another 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, for sure. The banks can't be scared anymore. They've got to embrace it, right? So we're actually getting a lot of questions here. So I'm just going to head into some of the audience questions. Riad, this one's for you. What improvements would you want to see between the mobile operator mobile money solutions and more classical banks?
Okay, so if we speak about improvements, so the improvement is how to facilitate the entry of the end customer to those services. So I spoke about neobanks. So neobanks are banks that doesn't have any physical branches, so and they are taking a big market share. Why? Because they let the end customer to open an account remotely, to do everything that they need to do in a physical branch just on a mobile phone application. So this is what we need to improve, because as we know now, recently the end customer doesn't have time to go and be in a queue line and to open account, to subscribe to a mobile money solution or something like that. So if we open those services, especially the subscribing mechanism online with a secure, of course, secure manner, so that will help to catch more and more people. So this is what, in my vision, this is the improvement that we need to focus on it.
Okay, thank you. And then, Wane, this one's for you. What do you believe are the greatest challenges to mobile money in sub-Saharan Africa?
So regulation is definitely going to be one of them. I think one of the things that is becoming a real problem is that the adoption of mobile money was rather unprecedented from a regulatory perspective. So I have the luxury of seeing both sides of it. So for mobile money, I think it's been left relatively open in terms of regulation, but we're seeing more negative impact on consumers. That's beginning to grow. So cyber fraud is growing. Then where does the liability sit? All the questions are being asked, and regulators are quickly grappling to now just understand how do they now keep mobile money in check on the backdrop of the unprecedented growth of mobile money. I think that's one of the biggest things that are definitely there. Obviously, the second one I've touched on a little bit as well. Cyber fraud is a big, big problem. And unfortunately, the literacy, especially in Africa, look at any African country, literacy is relatively low. And once you've introduced them to a financial product, it's both a good and a bad, because cyber fraud also quickly starts to creep in, and the literacy levels don't necessarily help.
Yeah, that's a good point. Riad, I think this one's for you. It's when you were talking about cashless payments in physical stores. They want to know, can you explain what online payment possibilities are available for digital goods and services through apps and websites, and which African countries do you operate these kind of payment solutions?
Okay, so as statistics, for example, we have in Africa more than 400 million internet users. So it's the second largest population for the internet users after China, of course. So we see that we have a lot of potential in Africa to do e-commerce. So what we do as e-commerce for cashless, so we see, for example, big players now in Africa like Jumia, like Take a Lot, like Kilimall, So those big players, they are trying to push on e-commerce in Africa. And for example, Jumia created their Jumia Pay, which is a solution or a wallet from Jumia to pay online, and then you have delivery. Jumia, as we know, started with cash on delivery before, just to attract people, and then now they are moving to Jumia wallet and payment online. So that will help us to know how the market is going. And of course, now with the smart phones and the wallets on smartphones, we see that there are a lot of companies that are providing solutions to pay online for e-commerce websites. And this can happen with the push technology that can push a message from the e-commerce platform or the acquirer platform to the mobile application, just to approve that I am the customer that is trying to purchase this goods from this website and all that. So the technology is improving the customer experience on e-commerce, and also the companies in Africa, like what I said, are following that, and they are trying to improve themselves by providing all those features of digital payment.
Okay, thank you. Wani, this one's for you. Someone wants to know whether Zanaco Bank is looking at biometric-enabled chip cards for authentication to reduce fraud. I know biometrics are sort of a controversial thing in Africa. What's your guys' stance on that?
Yeah, so definitely we are looking at using biometrics because, like I mentioned, I think fraud is on the rise, and it's very clear. And I mean, that's one of my biggest nightmares every day. Now, how we continuously enhance our security or access control into the financial system is, I think, a critical component. So in terms of biometrics, the cost is definitely an inhibitor at the moment, because one of the things that we are driving when you look at our rollout, one of the things that the banks are trying to do now is to move away from only the higher segment consumer and move into the mass segment, which means that my rollout of whatever biometric identification solutions is going to be relatively large, which has a cost implication. So it's not necessarily going to be a priority, but we're also looking at how we can try and balance between the two, getting the most effective security functionality, but obviously getting it in a cost-effective manner to allow us to be able to scale. So it's a discussion we're currently having.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then, Riad, someone would like to know a bit more about your cloud solutions and how those work for African markets.
Okay, so our cloud solutions, so we have cloud solutions based on microservice architecture, which is the trend now in the technology development software. So microservice architecture is allowing us to scale, to do more scalability depending on how many customers we have and how many regions in the world we have. So our first and biggest cloud solution is called Wise Cloud. It's a platform that is connecting all your devices that you have as a bank or telecom operator or financial company, fintech. So you have the ability to monitor your merchant devices. You have it's like an MDM, mobile device management, and it includes also what we call the key management system, which is the first remote key management system platform that is done by a provider of POS and those hardware, IoT hardware. So it gives our merchants or our customers the ability to push the cryptographic keys remotely to those devices. And we know that we are handling financial transactions, so security and cryptography is the main focus on those financial transactions operations. So this is why we focus on key management systems and how we can manage all those cryptographic keys remotely with a secure manner and with a zero-touch experience of deploying the POSs. We have also some cloud-based solutions, like I said, the Wise Match also for the KYC, AML, and customer onboarding. So based on facial recognition, live detection. If you are trying to open a new bank account or telecom account, you can open it also from your home, and we can proceed liveness detection by showing on the screen of your mobile a red dot that is moving randomly, and you need to follow that by your eye so that we can see that you are not a picture, you are a real human, and then we can match your face and also the face that you have in your ID card or passport. So we have many solutions like that, the Wise Wallet, a lot of solutions based on cloud architecture, and especially for those financial services.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm afraid that we're actually out of time. I think we could keep talking about this topic for another hour. It's so interesting, but we're going to have to leave the session there. So I just want to thank our speakers today. It was really such an interesting one. So thanks to Riad LAQLACH from Wiseasy and to Wane Ngambe from the Zambia National Commercial Bank. That concludes the first topic of the day. We'll be back shortly to talk about our next topic, which is connecting the next billion, strategies for getting Africa on grid. And we've got some great presentations for you there as well. So we're going to take a quick break. So stretch your legs, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes at 12:30 Central African time. So cheers for now.
Sometimes it still hurts like hell. 'Cause you love me so high, and you left me so low. Now I see you go home, and you're the reason why. Sometimes it still hurts like hell. 'Cause you love me so high, and you left me so low. Now I see why. 'Cause I can't go home, and you're the reason why. You're the reason why.
This is Brian Jenkins, Intelsat, Regional VP for Africa testing. Pretty girls in conversation, so
patience. I believe my heart belongs to one. Information below. I lost my patience, but don't wish I knew just what I want. I said, breaking my heart from the end to the start. I don't know how to protect it, and I want to stay, but I can't. Breaking my heart from the end to the start. I don't know how to protect it, and I want to stay. And you say you love me, but you don't know my name. Oh, don't say you love me, just 'cause I feel. You and I go the distance to God. I did you pass the time. And I guess when I saw it in your eyes, in your eyes, but I was blind. How could I be so blind? I said, girl, breaking my heart from the end to the start. I don't know how to protect it, and I want to stay, but I can't. Breaking my heart from the end to the start. I don't know how to protect it, and I want to stay, but I can't. Breaking my heart from the end to the start. And I want to say it. You say you love me, but you don't know my name. Oh, don't say you love me just 'cause I feel that way. I would like to do the sound check for Jane Coffin. Jane, please can you make sure that your webcam is turned on and your microphone is on? And please can you say your name and job title, please? Dion, I need to do a sound and console check with you. Please, can you say your name and your job title and ensure your camera is switched on?
Hi, Rebecca. Yes, my name is Dion Gerling from Connect Earth, and I'm the co-founder.
Thank you. I can see you, Dion. You're all set. I'm going to pop you back on mute now. Thank you.
Great.
Jane Coffin, I cannot see you on the webcam. Please, can you say your name and your job title, please?
Yo, what's good, man? Hey, man, what's up? How you doing? You look fresh. Oh, thanks for that. Got this new Jordan 6. Yeah, the Jordan 6. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, we can get that. Yeah, get it over. What? Jeez, that chain. Blizzard and shit, too. Yeah, we'll take that, too.
Hi, this is Jane. I'm just checking to see if you can hear me.
Hi, Jane. I can hear you and I can see you. So thank you so much.
Fabulous.
Thank you. Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's second session of the day, Day 2 of AfricaCom Symposium 2020, sponsored by Intelsat. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. On the left-hand side of your screen is the Q&A. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can type your question into the Q&A box and submit your questions to our speakers. All questions will be saved, so if we don't get to answer you, we may follow up via email. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the yellow Help widget. Here you can find answers to common questions. A copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the green Resource List widget. Towards the end of today's presentation, we'll ask you for your feedback. A survey will pop open on your screen and will only take 1 minute to complete. Your feedback is extremely helpful. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available about 1 day after the event and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier today. I would now like to turn the event over to our moderator, Connecting Africa's editor, Paula Gilbert.
If you are joining us for the first time, I'm Paula Gilbert. I'm the editor of Connecting Africa, and I'm the moderator for today. This is our last session for this 2-day mini event, and we are now going to be looking at the topic of connecting the next billion, strategies for getting Africa on grid. And we've got a great lineup for you today. So I'm sure most of you know that Africa has the fastest growing population in the world, and also the youngest, with about 60% of Africans under the age of 25. What is clear is that the next billion connected are going to be the mobile first generation, but we still have a lot of issues holding back connectivity, including affordability, lack of infrastructure, low literacy levels, and a clear mobile gender gap. So today we're going to hear from some of the industry's insiders who will share their views on Africa's digital divide and how to get devices into the hands of young Africans to empower them to join this digital revolution. We are going to start off with the agenda for today. So first up, we will have a presentation from Jane Coffin, who is the Senior Vice President for Internet Growth at the Internet Society. So welcome, Jane. Maybe you can just give us a bit of background on what exactly the Internet Society does and what your involvement in Africa is specifically.
Sure, and thank you very much. Jane Coffin, Senior Vice President, Internet Growth. Our involvement in Africa goes back to 1992, where we started having something called developing country workshops to introduce African technologists to the internet and to IP-based technologies. So we've been engaging both at the local, regional, national level across the continent for many years. And part of our, I think, formula for success is local, working with local people to train local people for local sustainability. We don't just jump in and jump out. When we work on projects, we are there for the long term. We have a regional vice president who's located in Addis, and we also have staff from across the continent, from Cameroon to Kenya to Uganda and Zimbabwe. Our staff in total are over 120. Our focus always has been that the internet is for everyone. I know that sounds quite simple, but we're also promoting an open, globally connected, trustworthy, and secure internet across the work that we do. We have over 120 chapters across the world, and there are over 30 in the on the African continent and the islands. So we have a strong local presence in many countries, where we're looking at who we know on the ground, right? Ears and feet on the ground. We have a lot of, as I said, local people who we connect with. But part of our secret for success is working with government, private sector, the civil society, and the internet technical community. So we have strong partnerships with Afrinic, with AFNOG, the network operator groups, where you're seeing some of the youngest people on the continent who are technologists getting better training. We hold peering and interconnection forums in person usually, but like you, we're going online this year. And we've been engaging with the African Telecom Union and the African Union and governments during this time of COVID even more and more. We do that normally, and we comment on different regulatory proceedings and policy proceedings. So we're trying to cover the landscape, but be super focused on what we do from interconnection and small community networks, but working hard for change. I think the most important thing right now is capitalizing, quite frankly, on political will, where we've seen the Minister of Ghana has come forward and opened up spectrum. We're keen advocates for easier licensing and other regulatory measures that would free up activities for both the private sector and for some of the activities we're engaged in. And if you'd like, I can quickly go over the slides I have, if that makes sense.
The other speakers, and then we'll come straight into your presentation next.
Super.
Okay, thanks, Jane. So the second keynote we're going to have today is Brian Jakins, who is the Regional Vice President for Africa Sales at Intelsat. So it's great to have you with us as well, Brian. Maybe give us a little bit of background in what Intelsat is doing on the continent.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a great opportunity to present. Intelsat has been providing satellite services, connectivity services across the region for the last 50 years. I think we're one of the first companies to provide that sort of connectivity. We have 3 offices spread across the region, from Senegal to Kenya, and head office for Africa in South Africa. So we have a team of engineers, service personnel, and salespeople across the region. I am responsible for the Africa business for Intelsat, which is head office in Washington, D.C.
So we're going to have those 2 presentations, and then we'll head into our panel discussion where Jane and Brian are going to be joined by Dion Jerling, who is the co-founder of Connect Earth. Dion, thanks for joining us today. And maybe you can give us a bit of background on Connect Earth and what you do.
Hi, Paula. Thanks very much for the opportunity, and hello, everybody. My background originally was internet advertising back in the dot-com boom era. And then in 2004, 16 odd years ago, I set up a company called Connect Africa. It was a social enterprise, and we were instrumental in delivering or extending GSM services into rural areas in Africa, specifically Zambia. We also worked in South Africa and advised sort of various other areas. As the technology world sort of evolved, the emphasis moved on to broadband connectivity. So I set up, in partnership with 2 colleagues, Connect Earth back about 4 or 5 years ago now, and we're essentially an advisory on sustainable broadband connectivity to everybody, with a particular interest on African youth. And we advise infracos, we advise satellite networks, we advise WISPs, ISPs on what sustainable internet access is all about. That's where we're at the moment.
Okay, wonderful. We look forward to chatting to you again a bit later, Dion. So we'll also have an audience Q&A at the end of the event. So if you do have any questions for our speakers during the day, just put them into the Q&A console at any point. Okay, so we're going to get straight into it now. And our first speaker is Jane Coffin, who, like I said, is the Senior Vice President for Internet Growth at the Internet Society. So Jane, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to advance the slides, so let me know when they come up properly. Can you see them?
So in the live view, if you click on the little yellow arrow.
Yep, there we go. Yep, got it. It's come up.
Yep, there it is. All right, go ahead.
And thank you again very much for having us here today. It's a pleasure, and connectivity is sort of in our DNA. We were founded by some of the internet pioneers, Vint Cerf and Bob Common, who created TCP/IP when they were doing work on some research projects. And so from there, part of our grassroots work has been educating, working with, and building capacity across different countries. And in many, many, many African countries. I think our strength has always been our African chapters, our team there, and the work we do on the ground. And again, we're virtualizing all that. And I think one thing I'd like to say before I truly get started is that COVID is keeping us all accountable for some of the connectivity that hasn't happened. And we have an amazing opportunity right now to change the game. Intelsat's been on the ground for 50 years. Our colleague at Connect the World, or Earth, has been doing work as well for over 20 years. I've been working across the globe on connectivity issues, from international financial institutions to the ITU, to working with the African Telecom Union and African Union. And I think what we've all seen is that it does take political will. It takes a collaboration. It's not just government. It's not just private sector. It's not just civil society or the internet technical community. It's an amalgamation of all of those actors working together. And one of the key things is listening to what people are telling you and hearing on the ground, figuring out how to work with policymakers and regulators because we need change. And so I think that's at the heart of what we're working on right now. As you can see from the slide, over half of the world is not connected. And as Paula mentioned earlier, Africa has one of the strongest and fastest growing youth populations. There's so much energy and talent on the continent that can be harnessed and people trained. So we aren't just grassrootsy. I want to be clear that we work very closely with the private sector. We have over 150 organizational members. Those are companies, internet technology organizations that are nonprofit, and others that support what we do. We are principle-based and we're not a trade association. So that means we can come at this from the open, globally connected, trustworthy, and secure perspective of connecting people. The portfolio of work that I do with people around the continent, both in Africa and around the world, is focused on internet growth, how we build a bigger, stronger internet, and how we promote that with governments, with civil society, with international orgs and donors, who we can harness that energy, whether it's working with Intelsat to build more base stations on the ground, or working with the small providers that we work with to build WISPs. And frankly, changing the game on licensing spectrum and access to funding, and changing that funding from basic funding from some governments to blended finance. This is really important for some of these small operators that we're supporting, and those are called community networks. The report you see on your left with the fellow on the roof, this is from the Eastern Cape in South Africa. We were there 2 years ago on the ground, which I wish we were on the ground again this year, but we're doing what we can with people like you to try and build up our energy and momentum for next year. But this report was interviews with local community networks. These are bottom up, what we call for the people, with the people, by the people. These are local people at, quote, the last mile, and I really don't like that term. I want to change it regulatorily. This is where people are unconnected and or cannot afford basic connectivity. I think you know some of the stats where people are looking at spending more on mobile handsets or their basic connectivity. 50% of their salaries are going into that in some cases, if not more. In this report, we've interviewed a lot of different community networks who are usually small WISPs. In some countries, they're fiber, wireless, and Wi-Fi. But this is mostly Wi-Fi-based networks in the subcontinent. And what we're looking at there is where we can motivate people to build these networks. GSMA has come out with a report a few years ago that indicated that for some GSM operators, they can't get a return on investment in communities of 5,000 and under. And so what we're looking at is a complementary way to start up networks that can interconnect and backhaul out with other traditional networks. This isn't a adversarial issue, or this is meant to be complementary, working together to find solutions. And what we've been able to do is kind of create a groundswell around the globe to change licensing, make it easier, make it faster, make it more understandable. Spectrum, open up some of that spectrum. This is highly important. It is seen as real estate by many, but for small areas where there isn't coverage right now and or you could share spectrum, meaning there's a lot of it, not enough of it's being used, and or there's safe ways to use it so you don't interfere with the other services. These networks can help do that. The reason they're so sustainable is that they're coming from the local level where people are buying into running them themselves. So people go in from our organization, from other partners like the Association for Progressive Communications, on the ground, training people, setting up the transceivers and receivers, making connectivity happen, and people getting connected for the first time. Right now, during COVID, some of those small networks have websites and information boards where they're trying to also make sure there's less misinformation spread. So there's positive data coming out for local people. And sorry, I'm keeping track of my time. The next thing I want to mention is the work we do to build community and capacity. So segueing from those small networks that can be built anywhere, even in urban areas. We actually have a network in Kibera. We've supported networks in New York City, believe it or not, something called New York City Mesh. And we're working with those networks to look at what those criteria are for success so that we can help model, replicate, and work with others to do this in more and more countries. So we do provide startup funding, we do provide training, and we're trying very hard to make sure that we're working closely with regulators and policymakers so they see us as a change agent and can help make change in their own regulatory bodies and policy in the ministries per se. And working closely with the African Telecom Union and the AU, the African Union, to promote community networks. They've been a huge help. Mokhtar Yadali from the African Union and John Omu also huge influencers and helping move the ball forward. And I would be remiss in not mentioning Dawit Bekele, our regional vice president, and Machuki Mwangi, who's done so much to help bring connectivity. So we will be having our, normally our summit on community networks will be held online this year. And so stay tuned, we can send that data out to all of you and we can send this report out. Segueing across the slide here into this capacity building and policy and regulatory, these community networks in some countries interconnect with internet exchange points. We've just released a report on the far right side of the slide. It's a report that looks at an analysis we did in 2012. That analysis proved that internet exchange points hosted on the continent will help keep more internet traffic, African internet traffic, local. When we did the report at the time, 80% of African IP traffic was being transited, taken outside of Africa through Europe and other places, exchanged, meaning given to other operators, and to come back to Africa. When you put in a small IXP or a big one, you exchange traffic on the continent. It creates cheaper, better, faster content delivery, more resiliency on the continent itself, and redundancy, because you can have multiple points of presence across the city that you have the IXP in. It's also a homing ground for content. This is where content delivery networks over the last 5 to 6 years have started to place caches in the IXPs, where government in Kenya, the tax authorities, put a cache in because they found this one of the most efficient ways to disperse their content at one point. And so these are not single points of failure. They're neutral, bottom up, managed by the technical community, meaning private sector, internet technologists, and others. There were 17 IXPs in the continent in 2008. Now we have 46 IXPs in 34 countries, and they're growing. And this is thanks to, again, the work we've been doing with partners on the ground like AFRINIC, AFNOG, and what is called the African IX Association, AFIX. These are local technical people helping local technical people to train. We have a flagship event we call the African Peering and Interconnection Forum. We're taking that online soon, and Ben from Liquid Telecom is going to be one of our first speakers up. So what we've been able to prove also with data, and this was the first data-driven report on internet exchange points put out by any organization, we were able to prove that when you put in an IXP, your latency goes down and your megabits per second change from 300 megabits per second for exchange down to 3 to 4 seconds. For anyone providing a network on the ground, both terrestrial and wireless, you want faster movement of your packets. So this is where we come in to help train with our partners. We provide equipment, we provide funding, and we provide the critical forums where people come together from the private sector to do business, from the IXP community to learn how to run the IX and mature it, and also to help start up IXPs. So we know we're in that business of startup, intermediate, advanced IXPs, and working with them and working with people across the continent again. We've spent a lot of time working with regulators and policymakers also to ensure that they understand that this isn't something that is outside their remit. They're usually on as observers. They're not running the IXPs. That's something we don't advocate, but we advocate that it's a collaborative exercise with ISP associations. Some IXs are hosted at government landing stations, like in Gambia. It's at the NOC, which is directly connected to the submarine cable. The key thing we're focused on, again, here is capacity building the IXPs, and making sure that local people can run the IXPs, advocate with government and policymakers, and keep more people trained. And that's why the partnership with the network operator groups and also the research and education networks. I would be remiss if I didn't advocate for that here, which is, can we work together more to help build out those national university networks? They're big pipes. They carry a lot of data. It helps educate young professionals and young technologists in the universities to think about a career in the technical space. It's also a landing ground for lots of people to hire from, quite frankly. Also, we've seen success in some online training that we do for network operators, where we've learned how to scale up the online training so that when they're face-to-face, they can learn from each other more and more. But this year has been quite something with respect to all our training going online, and we're learning more about how to deliver that training better, with advice from local people telling us that didn't work. You've got to try and do this. And so it is really about that groundswell of community, but I do want to stress that we are very business focused and working with the private sector and with government, as we indicated before, and all colleagues on the continent. So the success comes from listening, figuring out how we can connect the next 3.5 billion. It's pretty shocking that some people don't realize we did a survey. It was just US and UK, and we've got to broaden that to the world. But many of the people we surveyed didn't understand that half the world wasn't connected. Even though we're seeing lots of different information coming out about the resiliency of the internet during COVID, didn't fall down, hooray. IXPs are carrying more traffic than ever right now, and so are networks. And I'm sure our colleague from Intelsat will be able to tell us more about that. But we are a keen supporter of all different types of networks, from submarine cable to satellite and other. And we work closely with some with some submarine cable providers, from CGOM to Angola Cables to the team in Nigeria at Main One. We've had them at our meetings and our African Peering and Interconnection Forum, which we're transitioning to the community, by the way, and will be run out of a secretariat in Rwanda in the coming years, because that's part of the secret for success as well, is helping start up, ramp up, build, and transition, so that we're not a single point of failure as an organization, and we've broadened out the base of the pyramid of partners, again, from government to private sector to international financial institutions, satellite operators, submarine cable operators, and terrestrial fiber operators. So again, I'll stop here, but just to note that there is this importance of that local infrastructure. Let's not call it the last mile, let's call it the first mile now, out into connecting people who, if we take a step back and look at what the World Bank tells us and ITU, connectivity leads to socioeconomic development. This is good for all of us, for business, for the technical community and others, but it's really about the people who want to be connected. And so that's where we all have a part to play. So thank you very much for your time. There's lots we're doing. If you want some of our reports, we'll be sending them on to the team for your benefit.
Okay, thanks so much, Jane. That was a really interesting presentation to get us started. And yeah, if you've got any questions for Jane, please remember you can put them into the Q&A console now, and we'll be answering those a bit later. So now we're going to head into our next keynote, which is Brian Jakins, who is the Regional Vice President for Africa Sales at Intelsat. So Brian, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Paula, and thanks, Jane. Very interesting. I think as we move into some of the statistics and we look at the connectivity gap, what does that really look like when we talk about numbers? So what I'd like to show, and really to start off with, is what the GSMA has in the latest mobile economy release shown for Africa in terms of what that gap really sits at. So at the end of 2019, just under 700 million people remain outside of the mobile broadband coverage. So 40% of these, just under 300 million, which live in sub-Saharan Africa. So if you look at across these graphs, you can see that from a first world environment back into our emerging markets, sub-Saharan Africa has 26% of its population not covered at all, not connected, whereas just under 50% of them are covered but not connected. So it takes a bit of a deeper discussion to understand Why are they covered and not connected? And what are we doing to cover the balance of that 26%? We then focus on what we were talking about, some of the internet exchanges and points of presence that Jane was alluding to. And according to some of the Internet World stats, at the end of 2019, the penetration rate in Africa was just under 40%. So this is the lowest figure amongst all continents. And this is something that, as Intelsat, we strive to change. If you look at where Asia is the second lowest with just under 54%. When you compare this to Europe and North America, these have the highest internet penetration rates. And obviously with the pandemic that's faced the world, you will have noticed that everybody has gone online. Everybody needs to connect. ISPs are fully connected at this stage. And this is where we really suffer and see the impact of this connectivity gap. So as we move further into our presentation, this is showing you some of the pictures in some of the rural communities that we've been building some infrastructure. 60% of the unconnected live in rural areas. And these are real areas of, if you look at some of the geographics of that are captured in these pictures, the terrain is pretty tough. There's not a lot of roads, there's not a lot of power, infrastructure is lacking. So to provide connectivity there is incredibly tough. So you need to use a combination of technologies where it makes sense and it is economically viable for us to do so. Jane alluded to that there needs to be more participation in the provision of connectivity. This has to be private, it has to be public, it has to be governments, all working together to make sure that this connectivity is something that can be achieved. So when we want to have a look at what is that physical impact of providing that connectivity, just some of the socioeconomic stats of broadband connectivity. Globally, by providing 10% increase in mobile broadband, you see a 1.5% or up to a 1.5% increase in GDP. In Africa, this is almost twice as much. So a 10% increase in mobile broadband can increase to up to 2.5% in GDP. This is significant for any economy. And this is why it's important that we continue in this path to provide these connectivity services. So when we look at this and we say, well, why are we not doing more to provide this connectivity? There's significant barriers, and we'll touch on that shortly. So if we look at these rural areas and what broadband access can do, there are social benefits and that impact community development. African culture is really about a central way of life rather than individuals progressing as an individual. Internet access can play a key role in those communities. It's the same with financial services, whereas in these rural locations, people really rely mainly on livestock activities and natural resources that fund their livelihoods and provide food security. Yet most of these populations remain unconnected and have no formal access to these financial services. From an education point of view, we've provided and we've partnered with a few companies across Africa to provide educational programs. And this is to provide the best education we can to the market at large. The students have unlimited supply of knowledge and data that they can use for research and for self-improvement and to provide, to educate themselves. There's a lot more opportunities with the advent of providing mobile broadband. We just look at some of the rural connectivity partners providing into farms with government support, giving key access to market data. And this can provide an exchange of data amongst buyers and sellers. So this connectivity really stimulates economic growth across these informal sectors. So how do we solve this gap and what are the barriers that we've seen to providing connectivity? Barriers to connectivity that we've seen is really the cost to build out, the high cost of terrestrial backhaul services over long distances and difficult terrain, return on investment, We see it's low or slow in terms of return on investment, and often we will talk to, Jane mentioned that in some cases you need at least 5,000 subscribers or sites to be connected to show return on investment. It's very difficult in these sparsely populated areas to show that sort of a return over a short period of time. And then you need to look at where it's feasible from a geographic perspective. So in some of these areas that we provide, and as we're moving through this presentation, I'll show you a video of what we've done in the DRC. But it's really difficult in terms of getting into these places, coming over mountains, rivers where there aren't formal roads, and some of the valleys. And this was really just an extract taken from the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, is looking at connecting the next 100 people in rural and remote areas that live out of reach of traditional cellular and mobile networks, requires strong private sector involvement. This is investment, it's innovative business models, and alternative technologies such as satellite and Wi-Fi based solutions are key in driving that economic growth. So what does that look like from a space-based managed backhaul environment? We have an urbanized environment, and if you look at the green on the chart, you could look at that as fiber or copper connectivity through urbanized and urban clusters. Then you look at the mostly rural and completely rural environment, which is an area that we are actively pursuing to connect. The impact of using satellite services is that you cover all. You have geostationary. We have a geostationary constellation that covers 99% of the world's population. Distance and topography are not constraints when we use satellite-based services, and expanding the possibilities of your network is far easier and a lot quicker when you embrace all the technologies that are available, particularly from a satellite point of view. In this case, a single pool of capacity supports multiple applications across entire networks. There's no distance constraints, topography constraints, or line of sight constraints, and can get 10, 100, or thousands of sites. So this is a real advantage when looking at using satellite services. As we move forward, these satellite services need to be bundled in terms of proper solutions, because providing connectivity on its own is not enough. And Intelsat have developed a host of solutions, network services, to provide managed services, network planning and designing, to provide on-the-ground support 24/7, which is something that is critical when you're building up an economic environment based on connectivity. We have managed backhaul services. We need to find ways to reduce the burden of CapEx constraints and what it takes to build these networks. And this is what we've done from a managed backhaul perspective. We also provide professional services on the ground, and this is expert software and hardware engineering, all the way through to installation services, commissioning, integration, etc., into a mobile environment or an enterprise environment. And moving just beyond that is looking at how we provide turnkey solutions. So having the capacity on one hand without the infrastructure on the bottom and the services that go with it to create a complete solution is something that's absolutely needed in today's environment as we try and connect and close the gap of the digital divide at the moment. So what examples can I share with you in terms of where we've been and what we've been doing? I think this is probably key to visualize and see what we've done across the continent. In Uganda, for an example, we worked with MTN to provide 2 sites of connectivity. This is the Bufundi site and the Njukora site. The Bufundi site currently offers and gives coverage to 2 primary schools. If you recall earlier, I spoke about providing financial services to some of the farmers that don't traditionally have access to this. MTN has a Momo money provider. This is an application that allows them to trade. And this gives them the ability to connect and provide those applications into those rural communities. And then we have the Tokoroko site that offers coverage to health center and primary school in the Uganda area. So these are very rural areas. These 2 sites have been running for the last 10 months and very successfully. as we move on, I'll give you some more examples of what we've done across Africa. In South Africa in particular, we did the Internet for Mzansi. This is to improve the adoption of internet services through a lot of these rural areas. The focus on this is really to create and empower youth-owned and managed ICT small to medium enterprises, obviously looking at creating growth and job opportunities. We really looked at how we enable the participation of these rural communities through long-term training and mentorship programs, so that it's, in Jane's words, it's not a hit and run, but an investment on the ground infrastructure and something that's sustainable for future generations. This is an example of what we did with the UNHCR at the Ampain refugee camp in Ghana. What you see on the left is a picture of what they call their ICT kiosk, where they have a number of computers available to this refugee camp. They also provide Wi-Fi connectivity through satellite services. And this community serves over 3,000 refugees and some of the local schools. And when I talk about local schools, I'm not talking about a school that's 500 meters away. It's a school that's close to 2 or 3 kilometers away. And these schools take turns in walking up to this connectivity site. At the time that we built it, it was the only site in the region to provide connectivity so that they could do online learning, so that they could communicate back with their home countries and families. And a lot of them undertook a lot of learning from the community and from these refugees, not just the schools. But that's a prime example of what we've done in Ghana. We also partnered with Coca-Cola back in 2017 to build something called an eco-center. And the eco-center could be seen as a small spaza shop, if I could call it that, where they would be selling all sorts of consumer goods and essentials to those local communities. Those local communities are pretty well dispersed, but they have availability to connect to these sites over a 10-kilometer range. And this was through Wi-Fi access. And we enabled some of these women in these communities to participate in the economy by selling, reselling a prepaid voucher program into those communities. And in some of those sites, they were generating a significant amount of cash that was fairly sustainable. And the last one that I would touch on really to show you is what we've done with Africa Mobile Networks. We made a strategic investment into Africa Mobile Networks to accelerate the adoption of connectivity across Africa. These are some of the sites. Traditionally, when we speak about connectivity, we speak about it being very expensive, long to get there, difficult to set up. There's no access to power, etc. If you look at some of these sites, the one is in Liberia, where you see solar panels and the dish connecting to the satellite, and then the antenna providing internet services to that community. You have one in Zambia, and then the focus obviously into some of the communities across Nigeria. So this has been a strategic investment for Intelsat. The business model with Africa Mobile Networks has been, it's been tough in the beginning, I think. But where we look at now, Africa Mobile Networks have exceeded 1,000 sites across Africa, and those 1,000 sites have connected just under 4 million subscribers. So if you look at the connectivity gap of having 300 million people unconnected, and what we've done with 1,000 sites of just under 4 million people, there's a lot for us to do still. So then looking at our journey in terms of this connectivity, we'll move into a video. And this video is a really short snap of what we've done with Vodacom in the DRC.
L'amour, l'amour, toujours l'amour.
Tête de série numéro 1.
Mike Balusa. Pourquoi motonzali oyo asolenga Cyril Takis na Lubumbashi. Toxicoman ezanga d'amour ya overdose. Toxicoman komi robot réaliseur prometaki na motemeza programmé lokola donné na ordinateur. Montana Kabambai, le chemin de Paris. Toc 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 ezanga d'amour ya monongo na pilipili indifférent. Don Pierrot j'ai moko kakaliwa nas équations au soli amour ezali bende koleke bende koleka lopipi koleka tous les canons de Navarro. Emela Jola yoka kulutu abaleki mokolo bilanga Iva Migalani. Bolingo kende nanga pole pole yungu nafuta tapatapata finange community ya zoba zoba vraiment salinga ineti nyama choma solution il fallait toluka malembe vraiment miyoki mawa Patrick Luo aina miso nazolele l'amour toujours l'amour miso ninye l'amour toujours l'amour Kipablito nazolele l'amour toujours l'amour nakwa molingo ntango akokota ezalaka se na chikoyi kasi popo ekokomaka na su.
So really just a video again of what we've been doing across the region. And then to summarize, together with our partners, we're connected to connecting the next, or committed to connecting the next billion. A summary of Intelsat is, we're a pioneer in this industry. We've been developing and operating some of the largest and most advanced satellites across the globe. We've been in Africa for over 50 years, providing reliable content and connectivity to people where they need it most. We were the first to introduce satellite connectivity and currently serve over 100 mobile networks globally. And we've moved that forward into providing end-to-end services to enable 2G, 3 and 4G services across the region with our infrastructure in areas that are traditionally considered unconnectable. So I hope you enjoyed the view of what we've shared and look forward to connecting with all of you and seeing how we can drive these solutions further. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. That was really very interesting. I'm sure everyone gained a lot of insight from those two presentations. So now we're going to head straight into our panel discussion because there's a lot to unpack. So joining Brian and Jane is also Dion Jerling, who is the co-founder of Connect Earth. We're going to have all three of them on the panel today. So Dion, I think I'll start with a question for you, seeing as we haven't heard much from you. I know your whole business is really about connecting the unconnected. So maybe give us a bit more info on your strategy for targeting specifically underserved communities.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. Both of these presentations were fascinating, actually, because if I go back 16 years to when we started, originally we literally set up a little van that would drive from one village to another, and we'd work on the ragged edge of the mobile networks and use a booster, Yagi booster antenna, and connect up a little van with a couple of not satellite payphones, but payphones in them. They were called Djembe phones in those days. And it worked tremendously. We had a lot of government support in that as well. And then as we sort of looked at going a bit further, we started putting in satellite payphones. We worked with Iridium in the early days. And that sort of led us into the mobile network operators. We worked with MTN in Zambia, and started looking at the solutions you saw from Brian's presentations. It was kind of taken over by Africa Mobile Networks. And those solutions that are now being rolled out, and it's really great to hear there's over 1,000 of them now. Those were pioneered, gosh, nearly 10, 12 years ago. They've got more lightweight, they've got cheaper, they've got more effective. I still believe that they're lacking a little in the digital, digital access, as in the broadband connectivity, but that's a staged approach. I think one of the things that really struck me in the presentation was 60% of the unconnected, and this broadband unconnected, are rural areas. But the takeaway from there is 40% are urban. That means they're in a very well-connected environment, but not connected. So why? What's the underlying problems with that? And or why is that the case? And in my view, it's very much they have access to, they can't afford it. So the affordability of connectivity in Africa is the biggest challenge. And what we're trying to do is to try and find sustainable ways in which ubiquitous internet connectivity can be provided to everybody, free of charge. That's going to take some clever business modeling. It's going to take some clever revenue stream generation, but they are possible. And we've advised a number of companies, ISPs, and the like, in various ways to do this. I come from the advertising background, so one of the obvious solutions is an advertising or sponsorship type model. But it's all about collaboration, as Jane said. So, that's where it gets really, really interesting. It's an entire topic in itself as to how to make these things sustainable. But I think the key thing is it's got to be ubiquitous. It's got to be available to everybody. And they need to be able to get in, if not preferably for nothing, and then build up from there.
Yeah, for sure. Brian, I think Dion hit the nail on the head there. I mean, majority of these people are in rural areas, but we do also have issues in urban areas. So what's your specific strategy when you look at the differences? How do you target rural areas and how do you target urban areas differently?
Well, I think, as Dion alluded to, that's, the access, it becomes a point of affordability. And I think in one of the earlier presentations, we saw that the average revenue per user, let's say for a place in Germany, might be $16 or $17, where in Africa it's less than $2. And we talk about this only being in rural areas, but the pandemic has shown us that students living in great coverage areas are also struggling to provide connectivity or get access to connectivity purely through affordability. And what Dion mentioned earlier was, if you want to provide it free, are there other ways to generate revenue? Because at some stage, somebody needs to pay for the infrastructure or pay for the capacity or the build out of that. So advertising streams. And if we look at the presentation that I shared in terms of the partnership that we had with Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola were going into rural communities and saying, well, how do we get these people closer to these kiosks that we're building out? And they wanted to provide the connectivity to bring people closer together so that they could basically inadvertently be buying their product. So our target is really to provide connectivity both in urban, suburban and rural areas. I think in rural areas, we just need to make sure that we're able to provide cheap solutions that are able to stand on their own and are not subject to power grid failures, that can be solar powered and can be community serving, as in you're not investing infrastructure that gets goes down with power and is neglected, etc. So we have a specific market in terms of how we go after rural connectivity, but it's really no different from an urban suburban environment that has network densification issues, where they're trying to provide overlay networks, etc. So our connectivity is ubiquitous, and we can provide it from, as I said, urban all the way through to rural. It's just the infrastructure behind that might look a little bit different to cater for those specific markets.
Yeah, I think as South Africans, we understand the power issues very well. I mean, today we have rolling power cuts going on, and I know that's an issue across Africa. So that's really true. I'm definitely going to get more into the affordability issues as we go on, but I just wanted to ask Jane something. Obviously, this topic of connecting the next billion, we've been talking about this for a long time. And as you pointed out, it's really the next 3.5 billion. So are we really seeing the needle move? Maybe over the last 5 years, have you seen changes?
Yes, definitely. There's been a concentrated effort, I think, in many organizations from international, regional, national, and grassroots business and other to come together. It's the collaborative approach. And quite frankly, in the last 6 months, we've seen more collaboration from some folks that probably were waving their hands around a little bit about, yes, we need to connect people. Now it's really sitting in front of them. They have people whose kids are not going to be able to go to school, right? My mother's a teacher, or was. She's 79, so not teaching anymore. But she called me the other day and said, some of the kids here are not going to be able to study because they don't have internet. And I said, and I'm from a rural place in Maine, which is the northeast part of the United States on the coast. And I said, you're right. She said, this is what you're trying to do, right? I said, yes, it is. Yes, we are. And so it shouldn't surprise people to know that in the United States and in what people say are developed countries, there's a lack of connectivity. But what we've been seeing is there's a group called Althea Networks. They're more blockchain community network type in Oregon in the United States on the West Coast. They've been connecting more people for the first time ever this year. In the last 6 months. The same with this New York City mesh. And I know in Kibera and Zenzaleni, which is in the Eastern Cape, Zenzaleni has gone from being a not-for-profit with a commercial WISP to a now their not-for-profit is bringing in funding to sustain it. So we're talking about, as Brian and John have said, there's phasing here that I think people are starting to realize we really need to start to talk to people who have been on the ground and done this work, because we've got to create that change. And policymakers and regulators are scrambling a little bit to say, okay, what is the collaborative effort? But also when I say policymakers and regulators, I just don't mean the Ministry of Communication anymore. As both Brian and Dion have said, they mentioned schools and education. This is where ministries have got to sort of drop the silos of I do this and you do that and work together across the ministries to say, okay, from a commercial perspective, we got to drop the customs duties and taxes for the equipment coming in, because I used to call it keeping your internet in jail when the gear is in the customs warehouse. Been there, done that, watch the fees. Not a happy thing for a nonprofit like ours. We're like, that's a $5,000 warehouse fee. But anyway, it's back to that change there. The ministry saying, okay, if people aren't connected, and better mapping. A colleague, Steve Song, who works with Mozilla, APC, and others, has been so keen, and he's got an after fiber map, and he was one of the first humans to do work with Google to map the submarine cables around the African continent. You know that map you see that has the colorful subcables and the continent in the middle? That's Steve working with others to map connectivity. And I think we all know that sometimes people will talk about their footprint. And they'll say, there are 1 million people in that footprint, or 500,000 people, or 1,000 people. Well, that's the people in the footprint. Are those people connected affordably? And are they connected? So yes, over time, things have changed in the past, but right now there's an energy. I've even heard it from the United Nations, and I know people are like, well, the UN. And I'm like, no, actually, some of the UN agencies we're talking to, they seem to be moving in a direction where they're going to put their money where their mouth is, and move things faster. And so we have to take this energy. I know it sounds a little bit mercenary to say, okay, let's take COVID and market it, but we have to. We have to say, okay, people are not connected. Let's map where they're not connected. Let's find the complementary solutions, from those that Dion might have to Intelsat to what we're working on with the local network providers and the IXPs. But it's changing. With the statistics alone, which are not, right here at the top of my fingers, but we've seen the growth in internet traffic across the platforms, and the platforms haven't fallen down. So there should be faith in the infrastructure, faith in what business is doing, faith in what organizations like ours are doing in Dion's. And so if this collaborative approach can work, then let's harness it. It can't be a sole entity, because that's your single point of failure, and you need redundancy and resiliency in your partners and in your infrastructure.
Okay, thanks so much. When we're talking about affordability, Brian, I think there's still maybe a perception that satellite broadband is expensive. So have we seen that change over the last little while? And you mentioned, you've been rolling out more cost-effective services in rural areas. So how do you achieve that?
Yeah, so I think that there has been a change and a shift over the last several years. So from an Intelsat point of view, we have invested significantly in refreshing our fleet, providing high-throughput satellites that really change the economics of providing connectivity on the ground. And this is up to 60% in terms of total cost of ownership. So that's a significant shift, but it's not in isolation. So you need to have the ground infrastructure manufacturers as well providing the latest updates in terms of technology from a ground perspective to fully capture and enhance what you're doing from a satellite point of view. Once you have a satellite in space, it's not like you send somebody out via SpaceX to go and do some work on the satellite to optimize or whatever. So that's there for 20 years. I say that, though, although recently we've launched 2 mission extension vehicles, first for satellite industry, where we actually extend the life of those satellites. So also the first in satellite for that. But it's really a combination of partnerships, ground infrastructure, space infrastructure, and then obviously making sure that the modems, because we spoke about the high cost of capital and operational expenditure to run these networks, whether it be satellite, whether it be terrestrial means. So Intelsat have bundled this with various solutions that take away that CapEx need. We have flex solutions that don't have such a CapEx burden on enterprise partners or MNOs to deploy these solutions and connectivity services. And this has really changed the landscape, I think, over the last 4 years, particularly from a satellite connectivity point of view.
Okay, thanks. And then, Dion, I think we all realize that connectivity leads to so many societal and economic benefits. But what do you think are the main opportunities that unconnected Africans are really missing out on at the moment?
Well, it's a very, very, very good question there, because one of the things that I'm really passionate about is African youth, and what we're finding. Jane sort of picked up on it now, where COVID has provided an opportunity, if you like, a silver lining, where we've jammed 3 years of digital awareness into 3 months. And ideally, it's happened in the first world, where all of us, we have access to all of this, but we never quite realize just how powerful it is. You take that learning from the whole world, and we can apply that now to Africa, where people haven't really, your average African does not have the internet experience or any internet experience necessarily. And so they've missed out entirely. Also, Jane picked up on the fact that, this collaboration, we need to move quickly. The educational side need to shift out of their silos. I'm a little bit more radical than that even. I think that youngsters are going to have to teach themselves. There's no time for the education systems to change. And when you look at education, you've got to look at it holistic. It's learning, it's experience, it's vocational training, it's skills. It's not just academia. And, the internet is a very powerful thing, or connectivity is a very powerful thing, enabler that enables people to do it. Going on to Brian's comments about, what's necessary on the infrastructure side, we're starting to see now the device penetration is getting much better. The first $20 decent smartphone is already out. So, that's just going to get better and better. The problem is the data connection is turned off. These folks can't afford the data that's on it. So we need a radical rethink in terms of connectivity and making that connectivity ubiquitous. And then providing the environment whereby African youth can essentially access these learning tools and resources that are available everywhere. We're going to have 500 million youth in Africa in 2050. And 500 million youngsters, 14 to 24 years old, is an asset. if they're all connected, engaged, and contributing to global society, not just their own sort of environments, but the world, this is a massive asset that the world doesn't know it's actually got. So it's actually in the world's interest to start investing in that. And the way to do that is through the likes of Jane's organizations, investing in companies like Intelsat, pushing Intelsat to keep lowering the cost. 60%, it's got to be 80%, mate. We've got to get it down. So these are the things that are exciting, but a huge challenge. And I don't think we're going fast enough. We've got to think really radically. It's only 30 years from now. A lot can happen in 30 years.
Yeah, I enjoy your passion, Dion, and I think we do need to get a bit more radical. I like that you also touched on the issues with devices. So, Jane, obviously affordability is an issue in terms of connectivity, but it's also an issue in terms of actual affordable devices. Do you think we are reaching a tipping point where that's improving? I know we're seeing these smart feature phones that are doing really well in Africa at the moment. Yeah, what's your view on that?
We have seen the price points come down, as Dion has mentioned. We've also seen price points for very simple receivers and transceivers, whether it's MikroTik, Ubiquiti, some other, Huawei has some gear out there. The price points have come down. So building a network isn't as, and also the routers, switches, and servers, prices are coming down. There's more creativity. There's a group in Latin America building something that's actually being taken up on the continent in Africa called Libra router. It's an open source router, very cheap. But the device costs are coming down, so that means the network costs are coming down, and should be. And that's, I think, something we're all alluding to is you can't gold plate the networks anymore like we used to in the day. I used to work for AT&T, right, years ago. No more gold plating the network. That means you don't have to put in this extremely, well, you do want resilient infrastructure, so I'm not trying to say that what the mobile operators are doing isn't a good thing, or that you don't need strong equipment and resilient. But there are price points that have come down so that putting in the networks that we help with so much cheaper. And some people used to say that putting in an IXP, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars, or like $5,000 with donated equipment, because we helped start up, right? Or $10,000 in some cases. Everything changes in phases. To Dion's point, we do have to move a little bit harder and faster. We're sending out equipment tomorrow to Angola and to DRC. So people are at that youth level also learning how to use this new equipment to put in networks that will become more resilient and stronger over time and will have a different value later. But you still have to take advantage of what we can do now. It's much faster and easier to put in a network than it used to be. And the question is interconnection and backhaul. Can we bring some of those prices down? Putting fiber in, you'd have to talk to Liquid. But I think that if you can, half of the delay in putting in a network is regulatory authorizations. We've seen authorizations fly through here recently for edge providers and data center providers. I can tell you, if you talk to Terraco in South Africa, they would probably tell you, bring some of that administrative burden down. That is a huge deal for a company, and for even our little networks, where if you have to go through this huge process that's time intense, and you actually can't find the data in a very simple place on some of the websites for the entities that you've got to deal with, that's cost of business as well. So I think for everybody, you want to bring down that cost of doing business, and to Dion's point, do it fast. The time for the regulatory morass and the eight different ministries and entities you have to go through, what's the point? If you don't have people connected, you're impacting your own economic development, and that should be something that resonates with everybody.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to get into next. So, Brian, who do you think really is driving the connectivity market in Africa? Are we seeing the operators and the vendors doing it, or are governments getting more involved now?
Well, look, I think that governments are trying. I think they need, participation from the private sector. When I look at the mobile network operators, I can say that MTN, Vodacom, Orange, Liquid are taking the connectivity to the market as aggressively as they can, but funding is a challenge, and also regulation is a challenge. If you are trying to deploy fiber connectivity into an area, and you want to connect it via satellite as an interim, because traditionally, even in South Africa, it takes 9 months to get a fiber connection to a certain area. If the cost of that VSAT is $6,000 a year, it's too expensive for anybody to sustain. So you need to have government and private sector working together to enable this. Otherwise, it's going to stagnate like it has. The technology is going to exceed the connectivity of people. And we're trying to work with these governments and with private sector, as we did with African Mobile Networks. This is privately sponsored. Intelsat's invested, AMN's invested, and we're trying to do the best we can in terms of providing the lowest cost connectivity solutions into those rural communities. So it has to be a collaboration across all, as an individual technology or a single private or government sector will not make it.
Okay, thanks. Dion, I also know that your company does a lot of Wi-Fi projects in townships, also putting Wi-Fi into taxis and buses. So is it government that usually will pay for that, or do you do partnerships with private companies? How does it work, and how successful have those projects been?
So sadly not government, no. It would be great if they were involved, but these are all private enterprises that have all worked off their own bat. And it's a struggle, to be frank. It's not easy. You're finding that if we look at the bus network solution we're looking at, the content delivery is a cache delivery on the bus itself. So you're sitting with a server on each of the vehicles, and then they download the fresh content when they get to the depots. There is an internet breakout, which we're having to use a mobile connection, which of course is hugely expensive. So that immediately starts limiting the user experience. And ultimately, it all boils down to the end user. When we're working in providing these solutions, we have an understanding of what the end user's requirements are, both in terms of an experience and then the benefits that come out of it. We have a very strong focus on a learning experience as well, and a lot of the engagement we find in terms of making it financially feasible is by bringing in a sponsor for an educational or a learning experience, almost forcing the user to engage on some form of learning or information access. But it's all about money. The advertising sector is a key component of this. Advertisers now, as pretty much due to COVID, they know that people, the buses themselves are parked up, or were until recently. South Africa opened up on Tuesday for travel, so we'll see how that evolves. So it's been a double-edged sword. Digital awareness is there, but the people aren't. And you need the people and the eyeballs in order to make the revenue streams work. So it's a constant juggling game. But there's definitely, the future is in this sort of hybrid funding model, where you have a user experience, the user can pay a certain amount, people are prepared to pay it. I think, Jane, you mentioned people are spending in excess of over half of their income. If you have to apply that to the Western world, that would just be ridiculous. So it is very much a case of balancing them out. The Wi-Fi networks are struggling. I remember 4 or 5 years ago going in and looking at connecting up shopping centres. And then it was only after a period of time you realize, well, you know what? Somebody who's going to a shopping mall, unless they're specifically going for the internet connection, they're not really that interested. The engagement in the shops, it has to be a very, very focused approach. So these kinds of solutions are becoming more and more refined. And as you understand the user and the user demand, the user experience, you learn and you become a lot more efficient at it. And it's very specific. It's similarly in a rural village is very different to that in a township, which is very different to that in a suburb, which is very different to that in a bus station and an office. You need to understand these aspects, because they're all going to relate to the sustainability in the long run. So it's not a simple answer to sort of say, yes, this is going to work for a Wi-Fi network or a WISP or a fiber network, a cable company or a satellite TV network. They all vary, but they are all inextricably linked. And this is where we have the sort of frenemy concept, where you know your competitor is going to be your partner one day and your competitor the next. You do need to, you know, it's the new way of doing business. So it's a fascinating time, and I think the next 5 to 10 years is going to be a really interesting period for all of us.
Yeah, fascinating for sure. I want to move into something that's quite a passion for me. The major issue that we're still seeing in terms of the mobile gender gap, specifically in Asia and in Africa. So Jane, I just wanted to know, how do you think we are tackling this to make sure that more women are getting access to connectivity and to devices?
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to the Alliance for an Affordable Internet. They're really, and APC, the Association for Progressive Communications, they have specific gender-focused programs, as does GSMA. I think over the last 5 years, it took on a more sophisticated understanding across both Asia and Africa, where people realize that there is a problem and that women are a very important part of the economic well-being of not only the family, but the whole country, right? And so things are changing, and we actually support a group called AFChicks. They came up with a name. It was a group of women who were learning how to be network engineers, who wanted to have a separate group of their own because some of them, for religious reasons, didn't want to be in this, learning in the same room. Now with online learning, it's so much easier. But they have helped power networks. They're building networks. It's become mainstream, where they're helping build community networks as well. They're engineering IXPs, and they'd help with that backbone that the mobile industry needs, that the other networks need, and or just the community itself needs. So I think that as we focus, as John said, on education, you have to make sure your population is educated, and girls and women can't be left out, right? And entrepreneurship, making sure that there's easier blended finance access. And when I say blended finance, I don't mean millions of dollars, because you can't flood some small entities in the beginning as a startup from a VC perspective with $1 million. They just can't handle the funding because they're learning how to be a business. And so we've got to figure out a way to give out smaller grants. People hate this in the industry, but if we're this smart about technology, we can get a lot smarter about how to help put out funds. We give out small grants of, say, $2,500, and that has helped power networks and women who are doing some of the work. I think this approach at the local level, where it's open, collaborative, and it's friendly, has helped build more business as well. I know that might sound very, I hope it doesn't sound homey, but it's definitely, there's a building over time. You have to build up the confidence as well. There's one young woman from Sudan, and Sudan has an amazing university system where they're doing some incredible technical training through the Sudan NOG, the Network Operator Group. A lot of people don't know this, but there are over half of the 300 women, half of the 300 people at a training session my colleague Machuki did were women. And he said, wow, Jane, there's a powerhouse crowd there in Sudan. And there's one young woman who's become an intranet network operator trainer, and she's now known across the continent. I'm not going to say her name because that would be a privacy moment, but I will say that you're seeing women take the lead in some areas, and we have to support them and support everyone, but just make room if we can. Again, A4AI has done more, and there's a study they did on affordability and gender and universal service funds changing. I should have put in a pitch for that earlier, but in any event, check out their report. We haven't got just a gender-focused program, we're across the board. But I think GSMA has done great work here. I don't know, I think Intelsat, Brian mentioned that the work they've done, again, it's a collaborative approach, and it takes ministries breaking down the barriers to really focus on how everyone can get access and training, and not just segment it.
Yeah, so Brian, has that become more of a focus for you over the last little while?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, it's actually quite funny. In Intelsat, we have quite a lot of women engineering coming from, I would say, mainly Western Europe. So I think it really starts at the baseline. We have internships where we look to really sponsor that sort of diversity. So there's a formal process within Intelsat from a diversity perspective to try and encourage and ensure that we bring them into, because from a space engineering perspective, even if you look at some of the more, from the Americas all the way through Europe, there's not a lot happening from an engineering perspective, or that people can really study to get into that sort of environment. What we've seen is in Europe, Western Europe, there's been quite a pickup on that. So we have formal programs to try and enhance and ensure that we continue to secure that sort of diversity. So from an Intelsat perspective, it's a high priority for us.
Okay, that's great to hear. Dion, is digital literacy for women something that you guys are focused on?
Absolutely. I'm actually working very closely currently with a really innovative lady who has developed an early childhood development app. We coined a phrase called "Amazing Mums." And if you look at Africa, the 3-year-olds today are going to be the parents of those 500 million youth in 2050. If we can empower the mums of these 3-year-olds, who they need not necessarily have had the educational experience or even the digital awareness that's going to be expected of their kids, but as long as they're open to providing it for their youngsters, this is going to fast track this access to information, to knowledge, and to learning. So, and it's all about the mum. In Africa in particular, the mums are run the show essentially. So, I think that that's one area that if we can focus on empowering the mothers of Africa today, specifically for their children, from the 3-year-olds upwards, the 3 to 8 is the most informative period in terms of learning. These early childhood development programs are fascinating, and they're digital. The empowerment it can give, it's video. So, literacy is not an issue. It's games. It's playing games that develop the neural development of a child's brain, and scientifically linked to very simple games that people can play in a grass hut or in a 5-star hotel. It doesn't matter. And that, I think, is crucial, and just shows the power of connectivity specifically.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. I think this has been amazing, but I do want to leave a bit of time for some audience questions. Also, we're going to have a survey at the end, so we really would love your feedback. If you can fill that in at the end of the symposium, it'll pop up in a bit. But I want to get into some audience questions now. So the first one is for Intelsat. They want to know, are you looking at leveraging some of the new software and virtualizing technologies like MEC and Open RAN for more cost-effective rural services?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a definite lean towards Open RAN, and we're embracing most new technologies that are available. And I say this, where I think it was Jane that mentioned some of these new routers that have been rolled out in Latin America that are really cost-effective and what have you. If we stick to the traditional technology suppliers, we need to be able to force competition to bring the pricing down and to open up standards. And in the satellite industry, the standards are fairly closed. So if you have one manufacturer of ground infrastructure, it's difficult to expand using somebody else's modems or CPEs or whatever because of the closed architecture. So Intelsat is pioneering some of this to make changes in the industry. And we are obviously embracing open technologies, virtualization in our forward thinking in terms of what's next for satellite programs. And this is being factored into our next phase of EPIC 2.0, which is a high throughput satellite, lower cost, higher gains that will be available in the market in the short term. So all of these are actively embraced by Intelsat.
Okay, thanks, Brian. The next one's for Jane. The regulator in Uganda is advancing the new broadband framework that, amongst other things, speaks to promoting shared infrastructure. Does this opportunity speak to plugging the gap when it comes to serving the unconnected or hard-to-reach areas?
Yes, and I would say shout out to the new regulator in Uganda, Irene. She's doing amazing work. We were on a panel recently where they've embraced community networks. So they're looking at complementary forms of connectivity, rural, remote, urban, and we're seeing change with her and some of her predecessors, but she's doing an amazing job at looking at ways to open things up. But this also means that the regulators have to be open to the conversation, right? Sometimes they'll only listen to one group, manufacturers, or they might listen to wireless. It is opening up that conversation, I think, as we're all saying. And she's been doing that. And I believe Uganda's moving forward. Now, there have been some issues with an attempt at sort of nationalization of the IXP, which made us pause. But she's pulled that back a bit, I believe. And so there are people on the ground there that we support greatly. And we're just trying to figure out how you open up and broaden that conversation. I believe she started that. It takes time, right? And I think for some regulators to do mindset shift, she's an example of someone that started to do that. So I would say, you know, wait for it, but also I see progress, and I know my colleagues have too. It's
okay, thanks. Yeah. So there's one here that could, I think, be for either Dion or for Jane. Do you support any organizations in Malawi that are running community Wi-Fi? Dion, do you have any operations in Malawi?
Not directly, but indirectly, we know of a number of initiatives that are going into it. Startups, for example, where people are looking at how do they actually set up an ISP and how do they make that work. But we're not directly involved in Malawi at this point.
Okay, Jane, do you have any projects in Malawi?
We have a chapter in Malawi, and I know that they're interested in starting up. We've worked actually with one of the professors at the university for an IXP. And we're looking now to work with our chapter on a community network. But to Dion's point, I think, and Brian Longway is a fellow who's working with us on that. He's the new head of our chapter there. I think what we're looking at in Malawi as well is, you know, how do you loosen up the rules and regs and make faster business? Because we all need to be able to get to, whether it's market or nonprofit business, faster. So the rules and regs may be in the way. But stay tuned. He's on Twitter, and we often retweet a lot of his content, so we're waiting to see.
Okay. Dion, this one might be a bit controversial, but I think it's interesting. They want to know what strategies have been deployed to connect the next billion beyond just soliciting for political will.
Ooh, wow.
I thought you might like to tackle that.
Yeah, I think there, from my perspective, if you look at the demand actually comes from the user and the user up, and then ultimately it can potentially be a problem for some countries, and you're seeing some of the internet networks being, well, the entire country's internet being shut down for political reasons. But essentially, the groundswell is there from the user perspective, and it's very basic to start with. You know, people just want to be able to communicate. That's the entry point. Beyond that, as they become more familiar with it, so they become more engaged. As they become more informed, so they become sort of more active. And in some cases, some of the weaker governments, this frightens them, and it becomes an issue. But I think you can't get away from the fact that communications is absolute, and work from there. Going back to the amazing mums, if you've got somebody who is connected and they can bring their early childhood development sort of program into a digital awareness. And that's perfectly feasible in an African village where literacy might be a problem. This is doable. You start when people are more informed, it becomes easier. And ultimately the connectivity side, yes, there is the off switch, and if a government decides to flick it, it's a problem. But I think you're finding the trend is changing. There's a groundswell around the world now. Particularly where things are changing, your populists are getting a lot of flack, and it's not as easy for them to operate anymore. So I think we'll see things evolve. Politics never changes; it just shifts. and we'll evolve with it. But technology can certainly help address these challenges and make them a solution rather than a problem.
Yeah. Then I think this one will have to be the last one, but we haven't talked about IoT that much. So Brian, maybe you can answer this one. They want to know if you foresee a business case for industrial IoT, especially in the mining industry in Africa.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're working on solutions at the moment to address that. And remember, IoT is really low capacity, constant feedback. So these are creative solutions, mining, farming, that require IoT. So there are already solutions available through satellite providers. Intelsat's one of them that does provide that solution. The business case, obviously, like any business case, whether it be an enterprise solution or an MNO, needs to be validated. But there's definitely a growing need. And we talk about the old SCADA networks, which was really, if I could call it, just analytics, whereas now you need clever analytics to make a business case out of IoT, particularly in mining and farming. So yes, we have solutions already that are addressing that. I wanted to jump just before we get shut off some of the question about Malawi. We are actually partnered with Liquid Communications in terms of partnering with a company called Mbora. So Adrian Reisbeck is the CEO, and he is doing community Wi-Fi in Malawi. So just to answer that question, there is a company, Mbora, that is doing community Wi-Fi projects in Malawi.
Okay, wonderful. For all the Malawians out there, there seems to be lots going on for you guys. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but if we didn't get to your question, I know there were quite a few more, we're going to be sending them to the speakers, so they'll be able to get back to you via email after this. So I just want to say a big thank you to all the panelists today. It really was such an interesting session for me. So thanks very much to Jane Coffin from the Internet Society, to Brian Jenkins from Intelsat, and to Dion Jerling from Connected Earth. I'm sad to say that is the end of our 2-day symposium. It's been really wonderful spending this time with you, and I hope the topics were beneficial to you and your business. The AfricaCom team has a number of virtual events that are coming up, starting with East AfricaCom on September 14th and 15th, so please join for that if you're interested. After that, we have NigeriaCom on September 29th, followed by West AfricaCom on September 30th and October 1st, and those will all be happening online. And then the flagship events, AfricaCom and Africa Tech, will both be virtual this year, from the 9th to the 13th of November. So please do register for those, and we hope to see you again virtually very soon. But that's all from me for today. So have a wonderful rest of your day. Please do fill out our survey if you've got the time. Thanks very much for joining us, and goodbye.